I stared at my mother's text. Don't come to Christmas. Your sister's in-laws are elite millionaires. You'd embarrass us. 37 years. That's how long I'd been the invisible daughter. The one not worth inviting. The one whose achievements were never quite good enough. The family embarrassment. I typed back one word, okay. But 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a different message from a lawyer I'd never met. Inside the envelope, my grandmother's will. 40% of the family company, $8 million. All left to me. The granddaughter my mother claimed grandmother never cared about. My mother had hidden it for 12 years, forged my signature, stole my inheritance. And tonight, Christmas Eve, she was hosting the performance of her life. A 5-star restaurant. My perfect sister Claire. Her elite in-laws, the Montgomerys. Everyone who mattered in San Francisco society. Everyone except me. I walked into that private dining room in a black dress, carrying a certified copy of the will my mother thought was buried forever. And before my mother could speak, before she could spin another lie, Harrison Montgomery stood up, walked toward me, and shook my hand. Ms. Jenkins, I didn't expect to see you here. I've been trying to reach your office for weeks. The room went silent. My mother's wine glass trembled, then shattered on the marble floor. Because Harrison Montgomery didn't know me as Patricia's embarrassing daughter. He knew me as the managing director who controlled the deal his company desperately needed. What happened next? Let's just say the woman who banned me from Christmas was about to learn what it feels like to be erased, and by the end of this night my mother would lose far more than a wine glass. Stick around. You won't believe how this ends. My name is Amanda Jenkins. I'm 37 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building a career in venture capital that my family knows almost nothing about. That's not an accident, it's survival. The text came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my corner office at Vanguard Capital. My phone lit up with my mother's name, and I felt that familiar tightening in my chest, the one I've carried since childhood, the one that says, brace yourself. Christmas is for family only. Your sister's in-laws are elite millionaires. Your presence would embarrass us all. I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't understand, I understood perfectly. I read it because some part of me kept hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something different. Something kinder. But they didn't. They sat there on my screen, polite and deadly like arsenic in a crystal glass. This wasn't the first time I'd been uninvited from my own family. I'd missed Thanksgiving's Easter dinners, my sister Claire's engagement party. I'd learned about major family events through social media posts where I was conspicuously absent from every photo. But this was the first time my mother had put it into words so explicitly. Your presence would embarrass us all. Not, we'd love to have you, but it's complicated. Not, maybe next year. Just the plain truth, I was an embarrassment. A liability. Someone to be hidden away when important people were watching. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could write back. I could ask why. I could demand an explanation list. My accomplishments remind her that I was her daughter too. But what would be the point? I'd spent 37 years trying to earn Patricia Jenkins' approval, and I'd learned the hard way that some people will never give you what they don't have to give. So I typed one word, okay. I hit send and set my phone face down on my desk. My hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with something colder. Clarity, maybe, or resignation. I was 37 years old, successful by any reasonable measure, and my mother still treated me like an inconvenient mistake she'd been trying to correct for decades. I should have gone back to my reports. I had a presentation due in 2 days. But instead, I opened my desk drawer, the bottom one, where I kept personal things I didn't want my assistant to accidentally see. Tucked beneath old tax documents and a stack of business cards was a thick manila envelope that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. Certified mail. Law firm letterhead embossed in navy blue, Becker & Associates Estate Planning. A name I'd never heard of, Martin Becker, Esquire. I'd been avoiding opening it. Some instinct told me that whatever was inside would change everything, and I wasn't sure I was ready for more change. My life was carefully constructed, deliberately small. I worked hard, kept my head down, maintained a handful of close friendships and no family ties beyond the occasional awkward text exchange. It was a lonely life, maybe, but it was safe, predictable, mine. But my mother's text had done something to me. It had stripped away the last pretense that I had a family to protect, a relationship to preserve. If I was already being excluded, what exactly did I have to lose? I pulled out the envelope and broke the seal. Inside was a letter typed on expensive stationery, and beneath it a document with an official-looking seal. My eyes scanned the letter first. Dear Ms. Jenkins, my name is Martin Becker, and I served as your grandmother, Catherine Margaret Jenkins's estate attorney. I have been attempting to locate you since her death in 2013. Your family informed me that you had moved abroad, and they did not have current contact information for you. I recently located you through professional networking channels. I am writing to inform you that you are named as a primary beneficiary in your grandmother's will. My heart started pounding. I picked up the will itself, hands trembling now for a different reason. I, Catherine Margaret Jenkins, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave to my granddaughter Amanda, Catherine Jenkins, the only descendant who bears my name, my entire 40% stake in Jenkins Holdings, currently valued at approximately $8 million, as well as the family estate property located at 482 Redwood Drive. I read it 3 times, then 4. The words didn't change. $8 million, 40% of the family company. The house where I'd spent summers as a child, where grandmother had taught me to play chess on the wraparound porch. All left to me, 12 years ago. The lawyer's letter continued. I made multiple attempts to deliver this will to you in 2013 and 2014. I was told by your family that you were unreachable. In 2014, a document was filed with the probate court, a disclaimer of inheritance, bearing your signature stating that you refused the bequest. At the time, I had no reason to question its authenticity. However, I recently had cause to review the case file, and certain irregularities led me to investigate further. Ms. Jenkins, I believe your family has been hiding this will from you. I believe someone may have forged your signature on that disclaimer. The office suddenly felt very small, very quiet. I could hear my own breathing, sharp and shallow. Memories flooded back, pieces clicking into place like a puzzle I'd never known I was solving. Every family gathering I wasn't invited to. Every time my mother changed the subject when I mentioned grandmother. The way my father couldn't meet my eyes at grandmother's funeral, the last family event I'd attended 9 years ago. I'd thought he was grieving. Now I wondered if it was guilt. My mother hadn't excluded me because I was inadequate. She'd excluded me because I was dangerous, because I held the power to disrupt everything she'd built in the 12 years since grandmother died. Because if I knew the truth, her carefully constructed world would collapse. I looked at my phone, at that single word still glowing on the screen. Okay. My mother thought I was backing down, disappearing quietly the way I always had, accepting my exile with grace. She had no idea that 3 weeks ago I'd learned I wasn't the powerless, worthless daughter she'd spent decades convincing me I was. She had no idea that the inheritance she'd stolen, yes, stolen because that's what this was, had just been returned to me by a lawyer who'd spent years searching. And she definitely had no idea that I'd just made a reservation at Corvo Bianco for Christmas Eve. Same restaurant, same time. I picked up my phone and called the lawyer whose number was printed at the bottom of the letter. Mr. Becker, I said when he answered, this is Amanda Jenkins. I received your letter. And yes, I'd like to discuss how someone forged my signature to steal $8 million from me. My mother wanted me to stay away from Christmas because my presence would embarrass the family. She was right to be afraid, but not for the reasons she thought. I hung up the phone after scheduling a meeting with Martin Becker for the following morning. My hands had stopped shaking. In fact, I felt steadier than I had in years, as if some fundamental truth about my life had finally clicked into place. I looked around my office, the space I'd earned through 15 years of relentless work. Not a single item in this room had come from family connections. No introductions from my father's business associates. No doors opened because of the Jenkins name. I'd built this career the hard way, one client relationship at a time, one successful deal after another, proving my worth to people who knew nothing about my family except what I chose to tell them, which was almost nothing. After college, I'd deliberately chosen venture capital because it was merit-based. You either delivered results or you didn't. Your last name might get you in the door, but it wouldn't keep you there if you couldn't close deals. I'd worked late nights, weekends, holidays. I'd learned to read financial statements the way some people read novels. I'd cultivated relationships with startup founders and established executives alike, building a reputation as someone who was sharp, fair, and discreet. The discretion was key. Early on, I'd made the mistake of sharing my successes with my family. When I closed my first major deal at 25, I'd called home excited to share the news. My mother had listened politely and then said, "That's nice, dear. Claire just got promoted to senior associate at her law firm. They say she's the youngest person in the firm's history to reach that level." The message was clear. Whatever I accomplished, Claire had done better, faster, more impressively. So I stopped calling, stopped sharing, stopped hoping that maybe this achievement would be the one that finally made them see me. My silence wasn't shame. It was survival. I learned to build a life where my worth wasn't determined by Patricia's approval or Claire's accomplishments. A life where I could be successful without constantly measuring myself against an impossible standard. At Vanguard Capital, I'm known simply as Amanda Jenkins, the managing director who closed 3 major deals this year and has a reputation for spotting promising investments before anyone else. My colleagues don't know that my father sits on the board of a significant Bay Area company. They don't know I have a sister who married into old money. They don't know that my mother once told me I was too aggressive for a woman and that it would put off potential husbands. I keep no social media presence. I decline personal interviews. The photos in my office are of places I've traveled, not people. My professional biography is deliberately vague about my background. This anonymity was intentional, a protective measure I'd learned from the only person who'd ever truly understood me. I opened my phone and scrolled to an old photo I'd kept for years. It showed me at 12 years old standing next to Grandmother Catherine in front of the Museum of Modern Art. I was wearing a blue dress, my hair in braids, grinning at the camera. Grandmother stood beside me, elegant in a navy suit, her hand on my shoulder. I remembered that day with perfect clarity. She'd taken me to see an exhibit on women entrepreneurs. Women who'd built businesses in the 1950s and 60s when society told them to stay home. Afterwards, we'd had lunch at a cafe, and she'd said something I'd never forgotten. "You're like me, Amanda, strong-willed, independent. You have opinions, and you're not afraid to share them. Your mother will never understand that because it terrifies her." I'd been confused. Why would it terrify her? Grandmother had smiled sadly. Because strong women remind her of her own strength, the strength she gave up trying to fit into a role that was never meant for her. At 12, I didn't fully understand what she meant. I do now. Patricia had spent 15 years trying to mold herself into what Catherine wanted, trying to be refined enough, educated enough to belong in the Jenkins family, and she'd failed, at least in Catherine's eyes. Catherine had never let her forget that she'd married up, that she came from a different world. When I was born looking like Catherine, same sharp features, same direct gaze, same stubborn set to my jaw, Patricia must have seen me as a living reminder of her failure. And when Catherine took me under her wing, praised me, invested time in me, Patricia couldn't separate her resentment of Catherine from her feelings toward me. I wasn't just her daughter. I was Catherine's heir apparent, the granddaughter who bore her name, the one who'd inherited not just her looks, but apparently her personality, the confidence, the independence, the refusal to shrink myself to make others comfortable. And Patricia couldn't forgive me for that resemblance. The lawyer's letter had included something else, a personal note from Grandmother Catherine handwritten on her personal stationery. I'd read it so many times I'd nearly memorized it. "My dearest Amanda, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and your mother has likely hidden my will. I'm not surprised. I wish I could say I didn't understand why she'd do such a thing, but I do understand. I made terrible mistakes with Patricia. I was cruel when I should have been kind. I judged her when I should have welcomed her. I spent 15 years making her feel like she didn't belong, and then I wonder why she resents you for being everything I told her she wasn't. But I won't let her repeat my mistakes with you, Amanda. This inheritance isn't about money, though I hope the financial security helps you build the life you deserve. It's about giving you the choice I never gave Patricia, the choice to be free. Free from needing anyone's approval. Free from depending on family acceptance. Free to be exactly who you are unapologetically. Use it well. Be kinder than I was. Be stronger than she is. And most of all, be free. With all my love, Catherine. I'd cried when I first read those words. I cried because Catherine understood. She understood that the cruelty she'd inflicted on Patricia had poisoned the next generation. She understood that her mistakes had cost me a mother's love, and she'd tried in her imperfect way to give me a way out. Now I had a choice to make. I could take the inheritance quietly, let the lawyers handle everything, avoid confrontation. Or I could walk into that Christmas dinner my mother had banned me from and force the truth into the light. I could make her face what she'd done, not just the legal fraud of forging my signature, but the deeper betrayal of erasing her own daughter for 12 years. The old Amanda would have chosen silence, would have taken the money and disappeared, grateful to finally have proof that she mattered, even if only to a dead woman. But I wasn't the old Amanda anymore. I'd spent 15 years building a life of quiet strength. Now it was time to stop being quiet. I opened my laptop and made a reservation at Corvo Bianco for Christmas Eve. 1 seat, same time as my family's dinner. Just close enough to make an entrance when the moment was right. My mother wanted me to stay away because my presence would embarrass the family. She was absolutely right to be afraid, but not because I was an embarrassment, because I was finally ready to stop hiding. While Amanda was making her plans in San Francisco, I was sitting in my study in our home in Pacific Heights, reviewing the seating chart for Christmas Eve dinner for the 3rd time. Everything had to be perfect. Not just good perfect. The Montgomerys were coming, and this dinner would set the tone for Claire's entire marriage, possibly for the next generation of our family. I've never been the kind of mother who raises her voice or makes scenes. I don't need to. Over the years, I've learned that true power comes from soft-spoken certainty, from carefully chosen phrases delivered with just the right combination of concern and authority. I'm only thinking of what's best for you. You know how people talk. Let's be smart about this, shall we? People hear care in those words, guidance. They don't hear control. To the outside world, I know exactly what I look like. Patricia Jenkins. Elegant and composed, devoted to her daughter's success, active in the right charities, married to the right man, living in the right neighborhood. I've worked very hard to maintain that image. 25 years of careful cultivation of learning which fork to use and which wine to order, and how to laugh at the right moments in conversations about art and politics, and things I'd never encountered growing up in a 3-bedroom house in Sacramento, where my father drove a delivery truck and my mother cleaned other people's homes. But people close to me, and there aren't many anymore, know the truth. I don't guide my daughters toward happiness. I arrange them into the picture I need the world to see. Claire understood this instinctively. She became exactly what I needed: beautiful, agreeable, successful in acceptable ways. A lawyer, but not the aggressive kind. Married to David Montgomery, whose family name opens doors I spent 2 decades trying to open myself. Amanda never understood. Or maybe she understood too well and refused to play along. This Christmas dinner isn't really about family, though I'd never say that out loud. It's a performance carefully choreographed. The Montgomerys represent everything I've worked toward since I was 21 years old, and Robert Jenkins walked into the cafe where I was waitressing to put myself through community college. Old money, social standing, acceptance into circles that once looked at me like I was something they'd scraped off their shoes. 20 years ago, when I married into the Jenkins family, I thought I'd made it. I thought marrying Robert meant I'd finally belong somewhere. Instead, I spent 15 years being reminded by Catherine Jenkins that I was an interloper. Every dinner she'd find ways to mention my colorful background. Every business meeting where I tried to contribute, she'd smile that cold smile and say something like, "Patricia, dear, this is probably over your head. Why don't you see about getting more coffee?" Every family photo she'd position me at the edge as if I might contaminate the frame. She never said it directly, but the message was clear. I was that poor girl who'd trapped her son. I didn't belong. I would never belong. But Catherine is dead now. Has been for 12 years. And I've finally claimed the status she tried to deny me. I've rebuilt relationships with the families she kept me from. I've established myself as someone who matters in this city. The Montgomerys accepting Claire into their family is proof that I've erased the stain of my origins, that I've become what Catherine said I never could be. I won't let anyone threaten what I've built. I stood and walked to the fireplace, looking at the family portrait hanging above it. It was taken 5 years ago by a photographer Eleanor Montgomery had recommended. Patricia, Robert, and Claire, all three of us smiling, perfectly lit, professionally composed. We look like we belong together. Like we belong in this house, in this life. Amanda isn't in the picture. When the photographer had asked about her, I'd said smoothly, "Our eldest daughter lives abroad. She couldn't make it for the sitting." It was easier than explaining the truth, which was that I'd never called her. Never told her we were taking family portraits. Never gave her the option to be included. Because every time I look at Amanda, I see Catherine. The same sharp intelligence in her eyes. The same way of holding herself as if she has nothing to prove. The same direct gaze that seems to see right through whatever front you're presenting. When Amanda was a child, Catherine had adored her. Took her to museums and taught her things and told her she was special, brilliant, destined for great things. All the things Catherine never said to me. I defeated Catherine by outliving her. By being here when she wasn't, by taking control of the family narrative, by making sure everyone remembered Catherine as difficult and demanding rather than as the brilliant woman she'd actually been. And I would defeat Amanda the same way by erasing her from the family story. By making sure that when people looked at the Jenkins family, they saw only what I wanted them to see: Claire, the perfect daughter; Robert, the successful husband; and me, the elegant matriarch, who'd overcome humble beginnings to build something worthy. My phone sat on my desk, the screen dark. I picked it up and reread the text I'd sent Amanda that afternoon. "Christmas is for family only. Your sister's in-laws are elite millionaires. Your presence would embarrass us all." For just a moment, I felt something uncomfortable. Not quite guilt. I've never allowed myself to feel guilty about Amanda, but something adjacent to it. A small voice in the back of my mind that sounded disturbingly like my own mother. "Patricia, she's your daughter. Your firstborn. Don't you think?" I silenced that voice the way I've silenced it for years. Amanda made her choices. She could have been easier, more agreeable, more like Claire. She could have understood that family means presenting a united front, means not making waves, means accepting your role and playing your part. Instead, she'd always been difficult, questioning, independent. Too much like Catherine. I thought about calling her. Thought about softening the message, maybe even extending an olive branch, a limited invitation with clear boundaries. But then I imagined her walking into Corvo Bianco on Christmas Eve, meeting the Montgomerys, with that confident handshake of hers being intelligent and accomplished and impossible to dismiss. I imagined Eleanor Montgomery taking an interest in her, asking questions about her life, her career. I imagined losing control of the narrative I'd spent 12 years carefully constructing, the narrative where I have one perfect daughter and one absent daughter we don't discuss. The uncomfortable feeling disappeared. I set my phone down and returned to the seating chart. Amanda had replied with just one word, "Okay." Good. She understood. She was staying away the way she always had, the way she should. Everything was under control. The dinner would be perfect. The Montgomerys would be impressed. Claire's position in their family would be secure. and Amanda would remain where she belonged, out of sight, out of mind, erased from the picture I'd worked so hard to create. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, as I sat there arranging place cards and reviewing wine selections, was that Amanda had already made her own reservation at Corvo Bianco. Same night, same time. And she was bringing something I thought I'd buried 12 years ago, proof that would unravel everything I'd built thread by careful thread. I've spent my entire life being exactly what my mother wanted me to be. Beautiful, I learned early which clothes earned her approval, which hairstyles made her smile. Agreeable, I mastered the art of nodding at the right moments, of never contradicting her in public, of saving my opinions for times when they wouldn't cause friction. Perfect, or at least as close to perfect as a human being can get when perfection is a moving target that shifts with your mother's moods. At 33, I should probably have more independence. But the truth is, I've built my entire identity around being Patricia Jenkins's daughter. The good one. The one she's proud of. The one she actually wants at family gatherings. I married David Montgomery 2 years ago in a wedding that made the society pages. 300 guests a dress that cost more than my first car flowers imported from Ecuador. Mom had cried real tears, I think, when David proposed. Not because she was losing a daughter, but because she was gaining exactly what she'd always wanted, a connection to a family that mattered. Old money. Real money. The kind of family that has buildings named after them and sits on museum boards and summers in places I'd only read about growing up. I do love David. I need to be clear about that even to myself. He's kind and funny and he treats me well. But if I'm being honest, and lately I've been forcing myself to be honest at least in my own head, I also married him because he represented everything my mother had dreamed of for me. Everything she'd never had for herself. And making my mother proud has always been my primary motivation, hasn't it? Even more than my own happiness. The problem is that lately I've started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see, like the way Mom talks about Amanda, or rather, doesn't talk about her. My sister's name has become a black hole in our family conversations. Everything gets pulled toward it, and then disappears. At Thanksgiving last year, David's cousin asked how many siblings I had. Before I could answer, Mom smoothly interjected, "Claire is our only daughter at home. We had another, but she's chosen a very independent path. We don't see her much." The way she said it made Amanda sound like she'd abandoned us, not like she'd been systematically excluded. I've watched Mom edit Amanda out of family stories like she's airbrushing an unwanted detail from a photograph. "Remember when we went to Napa for your 16th birthday?" She'll say to me, and I'll remember that Amanda was there too, that she'd driven down from college to surprise me, that she'd been the one who found the little cafe where we had the best croissants. But in Mom's retelling, it was just the three of us, her dad and me. Amanda erased. Last week, I was at my parents' house helping Mom plan the Christmas Eve dinner when I heard her on the phone in her study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I was just walking past to use the bathroom, but something in her voice made me stop. That hushed, urgent tone she uses when she doesn't want to be overheard. "I need to know if there's any way she could access the original documents," Mom was saying. "The 2013 will. You told me it was handled. You told me she'd never find out." My stomach dropped. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I was sure she'd hear it. "Well, obviously it's not fine if there's any possibility." A pause. "I don't care what it costs. Make sure Amanda doesn't find out. If she discovers what's in that will, everything falls apart." I'd moved away before she came out, my hands shaking so badly I had to sit down in the kitchen. What was Mom hiding? And why did hearing Amanda's name spoken with such venom make me feel complicit in something I didn't even understand I wanted to ask? God, I wanted to march into that study and demand answers. But I was afraid. Afraid that knowing would make me responsible. Afraid that it would force me to choose between my mother's love, the love I'd spent 33 years earning, and whatever truth she was so desperate to hide. So I did what I've always done, I pretended not to hear. I went home to David and told him I had a headache, and I went to bed feeling sick with the knowledge that I'd become complicit in something just by staying silent. But the next morning, alone in our apartment while David was at work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The 2013 will. Amanda doesn't find out. Everything falls apart. I opened my laptop and typed Catherine Jenkins Will 2013 into the search bar. The first result was a probate court notice, public record. I clicked on it, my hands trembling. Estate of Catherine Margaret Jenkins, deceased June 2013. Primary beneficiary, Amanda Catherine Jenkins. Asset 40% ownership stake in Jenkins Holdings valued at approximately $8,000. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. $8 million. 40% of the family company, left to Amanda. But Amanda didn't have any shares in Jenkins Holdings. I knew that for a fact because 3 years ago, Mom had gifted me 10% of the company shares. She'd made it a whole thing taking me to lunch to tell me saying it was time I had a real stake in the family business. I'd felt so proud, so included, so valued. Now I realized those shares weren't Mom's to give. They were Amanda's. They had always been Amanda's, which meant Mom had stolen them, had hidden Grandmother's will, had somehow made sure Amanda never knew she was supposed to inherit anything. I closed my laptop and sat there shaking. David wouldn't be home for hours. I was alone with this terrible knowledge, this thing I suddenly knew that I desperately wished I didn't. I picked up my phone and called Mom. "Claire, darling, what is it?" She sounded cheerful normal. "Mom?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. "I need to ask you something. About Grandmother's will." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, "Where did you hear about that?" The temperature in her voice had dropped 30 degrees. I'd never heard her sound like that, not directed at me. I overheard you on the phone yesterday." Another endless pause. When she spoke again, her words were measured, controlled. "Claire, listen to me carefully. Your sister is not stable. She hasn't been part of this family for years. What your grandmother did was misguided, even cruel. She was trying to punish me through Amanda, and I wasn't going to allow it. I protected all of us by handling it quietly. You don't need to worry about this. Do you understand?" "But Mom, if Grandmother left Amanda, do you understand?" Each word was a stone dropping into still water. "Yes," I whispered. "I understand." "Good. Now let's focus on Christmas Eve. Everything needs to be perfect for the Montgomerys." She hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling like I might throw up. For the first time in my life, I was terrified of my mother. Not because she'd yelled or threatened me, but because of how calmly she'd dismissed something so fundamentally wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to David, watching him breathe peacefully, and I thought about texting Amanda. Warning her, maybe. Or apologizing, or something. Finally, at 2 a.m, I sent her a message. "Please don't come to Christmas. I'm worried about you." I told myself it was out of concern, that I was protecting her from an uncomfortable situation. But the truth was simpler and more cowardly. I was protecting myself. Because if Amanda didn't come, I wouldn't have to face what I knew. I wouldn't have to choose between my mother and my conscience. I hit send and turned off my phone. What I didn't realize was that Amanda would read that text and understand exactly what it meant. I knew what Mom had done, and I'd chosen silence. Everything was perfect. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this dinner, and as I stood in the private dining room at Corvo Bianco, surveying the table one final time before the guests arrived, I could see that every detail had come together exactly as I'd envisioned. Soft lighting from the Murano glass chandelier cast a warm glow over Italian marble floors. The table was set for 8 with Bernardaud china and Baccarat crystal. 7 chairs would be occupied tonight. The 8th, well, I'd told the restaurant manager we were a party of 7. There was no need to mention the daughter who wouldn't be attending. No need to explain an absence that in my carefully constructed narrative didn't require explanation. The seating arrangement alone had taken me 2 hours to finalize. Claire would sit next to Eleanor Montgomery David's mother, giving them time to bond. Robert would be positioned near Harrison Montgomery David's father so they could discuss business. I'd placed myself across from Eleanor, the perfect position to guide conversation and manage the flow of the evening. Every element was calibrated for maximum impact. The menu sophisticated but not showy. The wine list impressive but appropriate. Even the topics I'd mentally prepared to discuss: the new exhibit at the De Young Museum, the symphony's upcoming season, perhaps a carefully edited story about Claire's childhood that would demonstrate what wonderful parents we'd been. The Montgomerys represented everything I'd spent 25 years working toward. Not just wealth — there were plenty of wealthy families in San Francisco, but the kind of old money respectability that came from generations of careful accumulation and judicious philanthropy. The kind of family that had their name on hospital wings and endowed professorships. The kind of family that Katherine Jenkins had always made clear I didn't belong in. But I'd won, hadn't I? Katherine was dead, and I was here hosting a Christmas Eve dinner with people she'd never quite managed to include me with during her lifetime. My daughter was married to their son. Our families were linked now. I'd finally claimed the status she'd spent 15 years telling me I'd never deserve. The Montgomerys arrived promptly at 7. Harrison came in first, a tall man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of easy confidence that came from never having had to prove himself to anyone. He shook Robert's hand warmly and kissed my cheek. Eleanor followed, elegant in a navy dress, her intelligent eyes taking in every detail of the room. I'd done my research on Eleanor Montgomery. She'd been CEO of a tech company before retiring 5 years ago, one of the few women of her generation to reach that level. She was someone who commanded respect, and I'd been careful in every interaction to show her that I understood her value. We'd barely finished exchanging pleasantries when Harrison said something that made my carefully prepared smile falter for just a moment. "Patricia, I thought you had 2 daughters. Will Amanda be joining us this evening?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt Claire go rigid beside me, saw Robert shift uncomfortably in his peripheral vision. But I'd spent too many years perfecting my composure to let it slip now. My smile remained in place, warm and slightly apologetic. "Amanda lives quite independently," I said smoothly. "She's busy with work tonight, unfortunately. You know how it is with career women, the holidays are often their busiest time." Harrison frowned slightly, and I felt a flutter of unease. "That is unfortunate. I was rather hoping to meet her. One of my colleagues at Montgomery Capital mentioned her recently works at Vanguard, doesn't she? He said she's been making quite a name for herself in venture capital. Sharp eye for emerging markets, apparently. Closed some impressive deals this year." My smile felt frozen on my face. How did Harrison know about Amanda's work? She'd been so deliberately low profile, avoiding any connection between her career and the Jenkins family name. I'd counted on that anonymity. Counted on being able to control the narrative about my eldest daughter without anyone having independent information. "Yes, well, Amanda has always been very focused on her career," I managed. "I'm sure she would have loved to be here if her schedule had permitted." I turned to signal the sommelier, ready to move the conversation in a safer direction, but Eleanor was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. She'd built a career in boardrooms full of people trying to hide things from her. I'd seen articles about her red profiles that praised her ability to see through corporate spin. And now she was looking at me the way she probably looked at executives who were lying about quarterly earnings. "It must be difficult," Eleanor said quietly, "having a daughter you don't see often." "We respect her independence," I said, which wasn't exactly a lie. I did respect it, respected how convenient it was that Amanda had removed herself from family events, making my job of erasing her so much easier. Claire was staring at her water glass, like it might contain answers to questions she wasn't brave enough to ask out loud. David kept glancing between his mother and his wife, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Robert had started a conversation with Harrison about the 49ers. bless him trying to ease the awkwardness. Appetizers arrived, seared scallops with citrus foam, and I felt the conversation begin to normalize. Harrison and Robert discussed sports. Eleanor asked Claire about her work at the law firm. I started to relax, to believe that I'd successfully navigated past the dangerous moment. This was going to be fine. Amanda wasn't here, and by the time the evening was over, the Montgomerys would have no reason to think about her again. Then Harrison's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his eyebrows rose. He showed the screen to Eleanor, who read whatever message was displayed, and then looked up at me with a small, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that said she'd just had a suspicion confirmed that she'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it had just landed exactly where she'd expected. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Everything's fine," Eleanor said, but she was still smiling that unsettling smile. She set down her wineglass and sat back in her chair with the air of someone settling in to watch a very interesting show. "Just some news about a colleague, nothing urgent." But something in the way she said it made my skin prickle. Something in the way she glanced at that empty 8th chair, then at me, then back at the chair. She knew something. I was suddenly absolutely certain that Eleanor Montgomery knew something I didn't want her to know. The private dining room door opened, and my daughter Amanda walked in, not tentative, not apologetic, but with the calm certainty of someone who had every right to be exactly where she was. She was wearing a simple black dress, her dark hair pulled back, and she looked so much like Catherine at that age that for a moment I couldn't breathe. Our eyes met across the room, and I knew with the terrible clarity of someone watching their carefully built world begin to crumble that everything I'd worked for was about to fall apart. I stood outside the private dining room for 30 seconds, listening to the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter filtering through the heavy wooden door. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my hands were steady. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times since making the reservation. I knew exactly what I was walking into, knew exactly what I was about to detonate. There was no going back now. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room was exactly as I'd imagined. Soft lighting, elegant table settings, my family and the Montgomerys arranged in my mother's carefully orchestrated seating plan. 7 faces turned toward me. I saw my mother's wineglass freeze halfway to her lips. I saw Claire go pale, her eyes widening in something that looked like panic. I saw my father's shoulders slump as if he'd been expecting this, dreading this. But before anyone could speak, before my mother could recover enough to spin some explanation for my unexpected presence, Harrison Montgomery stood up from his seat with a broad smile. "Ms. Jenkins." He walked toward me, hand extended, his voice warm with genuine pleasure. "I didn't expect to see you here. This is a wonderful surprise. I've been trying to schedule a meeting with your office for weeks. My assistant has left at least 3 messages. I shook his hand, keeping my expression politely professional, even as I felt the shock ripple through the room behind him. "Mr. Montgomery, I apologize for my office's delay in responding. December has been exceptionally busy." "I can only imagine." He gestured toward the table. "Please join us. Though I have to admit I'm a bit confused. I didn't realize—" He glanced back at my mother, at Claire, then at me again, and I could see the moment comprehension began to dawn. "You're related to the Jenkins family. Patricia is my mother," I said simply. "Claire is my sister." The wineglass slipped from my mother's hand. It hit the marble floor with a sharp crack, red wine spreading across the white stone like blood at a crime scene. Claire made a small, strangled sound. My father closed his eyes. Harrison Montgomery, to his credit, recovered quickly from his surprise. "I had no idea. Patricia, you never mentioned that Amanda worked in venture capital." There was a note of confusion in his voice, maybe even a hint of reproach. In his world, a daughter's professional success would be a point of pride, something you'd mention at every opportunity. The fact that my mother had never brought it up must have seemed strange to him. My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. I watched her struggle to find words to construct some narrative that would explain this moment without revealing too much. But she was too shocked, too unprepared. For once in her life, Patricia Jenkins had no script. Eleanor Montgomery, who I'd seen in photos but never met in person, stood and gestured toward the empty chair directly across from where my mother sat. "Please join us, Amanda. There's plenty of room." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, taking in every detail of this strange family dynamic. "Patricia, perhaps we should have someone clean up this glass," the restaurant manager was called. The broken crystal and spilled wine were efficiently removed. I took the seat Eleanor had indicated, what would traditionally be considered the place of honor at the table, the seat reserved for the most important guest. My mother's seat. I could feel the symbolism of it, could see that Eleanor understood it too. This wasn't just about seating arrangements. This was about power, about who had it, and who was about to lose it. For a long moment after I sat down, nobody spoke. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Claire was staring at her plate. My father was staring at his hands. My mother was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but also something that looked like fear. Eleanor broke the silence, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. "How fascinating that you work at Vanguard Capital, Amanda. Managing Director Harrison said, that's quite impressive. How long have you been with the firm?" 12 years, I said, meeting her eyes steadily. I saw Eleanor do the mental math. Her gaze flickered to my mother, then back to me, and I knew she'd caught the significance of that number. 12 years meant I'd started at Vanguard in 2013, the year my grandmother died, the year everything had changed, though I hadn't known it at the time. 12 years, Eleanor repeated softly. You must have started there quite young. I was 25, fresh out of business school, looking to prove myself on my own merits. I let that phrase hang in the air. On my own merits. Without family connections. Without the Jenkins name opening doors for me. My mother had finally found her voice. Amanda, this is unexpected. I thought you said you were busy with work tonight. I am busy with work, I replied calmly. I had a dinner meeting scheduled for this evening. At this restaurant, actually. When I arrived and saw your party in the private room, I thought it would be rude not to say hello. The lie came easily. Let her think this was coincidence, at least for a few more minutes. Let her think she still had some control over the narrative. Harrison, bless him, was oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. He sat back down, smiling. Well, this is wonderful. Family and business all in one evening. Patricia, I can't believe you didn't tell us about Amanda's impressive career. We were just discussing potential partnerships with Vanguard last month. Were you... I kept my voice neutral, professional. Yes, there's a deal we're hoping to structure, and your firm has expertise in the sector we're targeting. It's actually one of the reasons I've been trying to reach your office. My mother's face had gone from shocked to carefully blank, the expression she wore when she was trying to hide something. Eleanor was watching her with the keen attention of someone who'd spent a career reading people's tells in high-stakes negotiations. I could see the wheels turning in Eleanor's mind, see her piecing together the fact that something was very wrong with this family dynamic. Harrison turned to my mother with a smile that was completely innocent, completely unaware of the bomb he was about to drop. So, Patricia, how often do your daughters visit? You must be so proud of both of them. I watched my mother's mouth open and close, no words coming out. For 12 years she'd crafted such a careful narrative about me. The daughter who lived abroad, who'd chosen a different path, who simply wasn't part of the family picture. It was a story that worked perfectly as long as I wasn't in the room to contradict it. But now I was here sitting across from her in a black dress and steady composure, and every word she'd spent years constructing was crumbling into dust. We're very proud of both our girls. She finally managed her voice tight with the effort of maintaining control. She'd always been good at this, at finding the right words to smooth over uncomfortable moments. Though Amanda and I have different views on family obligations. She's always been quite independent." It was masterful, really. In one breath, she'd acknowledged my existence while simultaneously suggesting that any distance between us was my choice, my failing. She was positioning herself as the reasonable mother, dealing with a difficult daughter. I'd watched her do this for years, twist reality just enough that she remained the heroine of every story. But Eleanor Montgomery wasn't buying it. I could see it in the way her eyes sharpened, the slight tilt of her head that suggested she'd just heard something that didn't add up. "Different views?" Eleanor asked, her voice deceptively mild. "In what way?" My mother hadn't expected follow-up questions. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes, the realization that she wasn't in control of this conversation the way she'd planned to be. She'd choreographed this entire evening down to the smallest detail, and I'd just torn up her script. Before she could construct another carefully worded deflection, I spoke. My voice was calm, measured, almost clinical. I'd practiced this moment, knew exactly what I needed to say and how I needed to say it. "I received a text from my mother 2 days ago," I said, looking at Eleanor, then at Harrison. "It said, 'Christmas is for family only. Your sister's in-laws are elite millionaires. Your presence would embarrass us all.'" The silence that followed was absolute. The kind of silence that makes you aware of every small sound, the clink of crystal, someone's sharp intake of breath, the distant murmur of conversation from the main dining room. I didn't elaborate, didn't add emotion or interpretation, just stated the facts and let them land. Harrison's face darkened. Eleanor's eyes narrowed to sharp points. David was staring at my mother as if seeing her for the first time, as if suddenly understanding something about the woman who'd become his mother-in-law. Claire looked like she might be physically ill, her face pale and drawn. And my mother's carefully constructed image was cracking visibly like fine porcelain subjected to too much pressure. "Amanda," her voice had an edge of desperation now, "you're taking that completely out of context. I was trying to protect you. These social gatherings can be overwhelming, and I know you prefer your privacy. I thought you'd appreciate not being put in an uncomfortable position. Mother." I kept my voice level, professional, the tone I used in boardroom negotiations. "You didn't ask me if I wanted to come. You didn't inquire about my comfort level or my preferences. You told me not to come because my presence would embarrass you. There's a difference between protection and exclusion." I turned to Eleanor, whose expression had shifted from curious to something colder, harder. "Mrs. Montgomery, you asked how often my sister and I see each other. The answer is that I haven't been invited to a family gathering in 8 years. Not Thanksgiving, not Christmas, not Claire's engagement party, not her bridal shower. I learned about my sister's wedding date from a social media post made by one of Claire's friends. I wasn't invited to that either." "That's not—" my mother started, but her voice faltered. What could she say? It was all true. Documentably, provably true. 8 years, Eleanor repeated softly. She was looking at my mother the way I imagined she'd looked at corporate executives who'd tried to exclude her from board meetings, who'd suggested she wasn't qualified for positions she'd earned 10 times over. I'd read about Eleanor Montgomery's career. She'd been one of the first female CEOs in Silicon Valley in the 1990s, had fought her way through rooms full of men who'd thought she didn't belong. She knew exactly what deliberate exclusion looked like. She recognized it instantly because she'd experienced it herself. Eleanor reached across the table and gently touched my hand. The gesture was small but deliberate, a public declaration of which side she was choosing. "I'm very glad you came tonight, Amanda," she said, and I could hear that she meant it. Then she looked at my mother with something close to contempt. "We clearly have a lot to learn about the Jenkins family." The words hung in the air like an indictment, not just of my mother, but of the entire family structure that had allowed this to happen. Eleanor was making it clear that she saw through the pretense, that she understood what kind of people she was dealing with, and that she wasn't impressed. My father finally spoke, his voice quiet and defeated. "Eleanor, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No, Robert." Eleanor's voice was firm. I think this is exactly the kind of thing that should be discussed openly. My son married into this family. My grandchildren will be part of this family. If there are dynamics here that involve deliberately excluding family members, I need to understand what we're dealing with. Harrison nodded slowly, his earlier warmth completely gone. I have to agree with my wife. Patricia, I'm having trouble understanding how a mother could send that kind of text message to her own daughter. My mother's face had gone from pale to flushed, a red creeping up her neck that I recognized from childhood, rage barely contained beneath a veneer of civility. But she couldn't lash out, not here, not in front of the Montgomerys whose approval she'd spent years cultivating. She was trapped between her fury and her need to maintain the image she'd so carefully constructed. Claire was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. David had his arm around her, but he was watching me with an expression that might have been respect, or might have been horror. I couldn't tell which. I took a breath. This was the moment, the point of no return. Once I said the next words, there would be no going back. No possibility of pretending any of this was a simple family misunderstanding. There's something else you should know about my relationship with this family. I said, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope Martin Becker had sent me 3 weeks ago. It's about my grandmother's will. I set the envelope on the table in front of me, my hands perfectly steady, even though my heart was racing. I'd rehearsed this moment countless times in the past 3 weeks, practiced keeping my voice level and clinical, free of the emotion that churned beneath the surface. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth, about facts, about forcing my family to face what they'd done. 3 weeks ago, I began, my voice clear and measured. I received a letter from a lawyer I'd never heard of. His name is Martin Becker. He's been looking for me since 2013. I watched my mother's face drain of color, watched her hand grip the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. She knew. Of course she knew. This was the moment she'd been dreading for 12 years, the moment her carefully constructed world started to collapse. I opened the envelope and pulled out the document Martin had sent me, a certified copy of my grandmother's will. The paper felt heavy in my hands, weighted with more than just legal language. It represented 12 years of lies, 12 years of systematic exclusion, 12 years of my mother's careful manipulation. He was trying to deliver something my grandmother left for me, I continued. A will, dated March 15, 2013, 6 months before she died. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. I saw her eyes go wide with recognition she'd known. When she'd texted me to stay away from Christmas, she'd known exactly what she was protecting. Harrison and Eleanor both leaned forward, their attention completely focused on me now. This wasn't social dinner conversation anymore. This was something else entirely. Something serious. Something potentially criminal. I unfolded the will, carefully smoothing it out on the table. I'd like to read you the relevant portion, I said. And then I began to read, my voice steady and clear. I, Catherine Margaret Jenkins, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave to my granddaughter Amanda. Catherine Jenkins, the only descendant who bears my name, my entire 40% stake in Jenkins Holdings, currently valued at approximately $8 million, as well as the family estate property located at 482 Redwood Drive, San Rafael, California. The silence that followed was profound. I looked up from the document and let the words settle over the table like ash after an explosion. $8 million. 40% of the family company. The estate where I'd spent childhood summers. All of it left to me. All of it hidden from me for 12 years. This will was filed with the probate court in 2013, I said. It's a matter of public record. Anyone can look it up. I did after I received Mr. Becker's letter. It's all there, properly witnessed, properly notarized, completely legal. I looked directly at my mother. Her face had gone from flushed to ashen, and I could see her mind racing, trying to find some explanation, some way to spin this that wouldn't destroy everything she'd built. The lawyer said he tried to contact me in 2013 and 2014. He sent certified letters to my last known address. When those were returned, he contacted my family. He spoke to you, Mother. He asked for my contact information. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. You told him you didn't know where I was, which is strange because you had my phone number. You had my email. You knew exactly where I was working. We weren't close, but we weren't completely out of contact. Amanda, this is hardly the time or place. My mother started, her voice shaking, but Eleanor interrupted, her voice sharp as a blade. Actually, this seems like exactly the right time and place. She looked at me, and I could see the steel in her eyes, the same steel that had made her a CEO when women CEOs were rare. Are you saying, Ms. Jenkins, that you were entitled to 40% of your family's company and were never informed that your family deliberately hid this from you? Yes, I said simply, but it's worse than that. I reached into the envelope again and pulled out another document, the one that had made me physically ill when Martin showed it to me. The one that transformed this from a family betrayal into a crime. Not only was I never informed about the will, I said, but in January 2014, someone filed a document with the probate court. It's called a disclaimer of inheritance. It stated that I, Amanda Catherine Jenkins, was refusing the bequest, that I wanted nothing to do with my grandmother's estate. I held up the document so everyone could see it. Mr. Becker showed me a copy. There's a signature on it. It's supposed to be mine. I looked directly at my mother again. But it's not. I never signed this document. I never even saw it until 3 weeks ago. Someone forged my signature. The implications crashed through the room like a physical wave. I watched the realization hit Harrison. First, he was a businessman. He understood immediately what this meant. This wasn't just family drama. This wasn't just hurt feelings and complicated relationships. This was fraud. Legal, actionable, criminal fraud. Eleanor's expression hardened into something cold and furious. She'd gone from curious dinner guest to witness to a crime, and I could see her rapidly recalculating everything she thought she knew about the Jenkins family. David was looking at Claire with a question written clearly on his face. Did you know? Claire was shaking her head frantically, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in short gasps. I didn't know, she kept saying. I swear I didn't know. Not until last week. I swear. But my mother said nothing. She sat frozen in her chair, her carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish against her pale skin, her elegant dress and perfect hair, meaningless armor against the truth that was finally being spoken aloud. Her worst nightmare was unfolding in front of the exact people she'd most needed to impress the Montgomerys, whose approval she'd spent years cultivating, whose social standing she'd coveted, whose acceptance she'd needed to prove she belonged. And then my father spoke. Robert Jenkins, who'd been silent all evening, who'd spent 12 years looking the other way, who'd chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truth, finally found his voice. Patricia. He said, his voice barely above a whisper, but cutting through the silence like thunder. What have you done? My father's words hung in the air like an accusation. Patricia, what have you done? I turned to look at him, really look at him for the first time since I'd walked into the room. Robert Jenkins, 70 years old, had spent the entire evening sitting quietly at the table, letting my mother control the conversation the way he'd let her control everything for as long as I could remember. He was the kind of man who chose comfort over confrontation, who found it easier to look away than to address difficult truths. But now something had broken in him. I could see it in the way his shoulders sagged in the defeat written across his face. My mother's head snapped toward him, her eyes flashing with warning. Robert, not now. No. His voice was stronger than I'd heard it in years. I told you this would come out eventually. I told you 12 years ago that we should tell her. that it was wrong, that we couldn't keep this secret forever. The table went utterly silent. Even I was shocked. My father had known. He'd known about the will, known what my mother had done, and he'd said nothing. For 12 years, Harrison Montgomery leaned forward, his businessman's instincts fully engaged now. "Mr. Jenkins, are you saying you knew about this will? You knew your daughter had been named as a beneficiary and you didn't inform her?" My father closed his eyes as if the truth physically hurt him to speak aloud. "Yes, I've known since the day my mother died." Eleanor's voice cut through the room like a knife through silk. "You knew your daughter was the rightful heir to millions of dollars and you said nothing. For 12 years you let her believe she'd been left nothing while you and your wife profited from assets that weren't yours." My father couldn't meet anyone's eyes, especially not mine. I watched him shrink in his chair, becoming smaller and older right in front of me. Patricia said it would tear the family apart. She said Amanda had already cut ties with us, that she'd moved on with her life and didn't care about family money. She said if we told Amanda about the will, it would just create conflict and pain for everyone. I thought... His voice trailed off. "You thought what?" I heard myself ask, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Distant. Clinical. As if I were conducting a deposition rather than confronting the father who'd betrayed me. "You thought silence was easier than truth. You thought I'd never find out. You thought I didn't deserve to know that my grandmother had left me something because you were too cowardly to deal with the consequences." He flinched at my words but didn't defend himself. What defense could there be? Dad. I forced myself to ask the question I dreaded most. "Did you sign that disclaimer? Did you forge my signature on that document?" "No." He said it quickly, almost desperately. "No, I didn't sign anything. I couldn't do that." "Then who did?" The question didn't need to be spoken aloud. Every eye in the room turned to my mother, who sat rigid in her chair, her face a carefully composed mask. But I could see the cracks now, the way her jaw was clenched, the rapid pulse beating in her throat. She was cornered, and she knew it. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Harrison shifted in his seat. Eleanor watched her with the cold assessment of someone evaluating whether to cut business ties. Claire was crying softly, her face buried in her hands. Finally, my mother spoke, and her voice had a chilling calm to it. "I did what I had to do to protect this family." There it was. The confession. Not apologetic, not ashamed, but justified. Righteous, even. Catherine's will was a vindictive final insult to me. She continued her words, coming faster now, years of resentment pouring out. She knew exactly what she was doing, leaving everything to Amanda, the granddaughter who looks just like her, who acts just like her, and cutting out Claire completely. It was cruel. Intentionally, deliberately cruel. Something in me cracked. The clinical distance I'd been maintaining shattered. "So you stole my inheritance because you were angry at a dead woman." My mother's voice rose, losing the careful control she'd maintained for decades. "I didn't steal anything. I managed the family assets the way they should have been managed, the way that was best for this family. Catherine was trying to punish me even from beyond the grave, and I refused to let her do it. You have no idea what that woman put me through, Amanda. No idea. Every single day for 15 years, she made me feel worthless. Every dinner, every business meeting, every family gathering, she found ways to remind me that I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough, that I was just some poor girl who'd trapped her son." She was breathing hard now, her composure completely shattered. "And then you were born, and from the very first moment I looked at you, I saw her. Those same eyes, that same expression. And as you grew up, you became more and more like her, confident, certain, always questioning everything, never just accepting what you were told. And Catherine adored you. She poured everything into you that she'd withheld from me. She taught you and praised you and told you that you were special, brilliant, destined for great things." Patricia stopped abruptly, seeming to realize she'd revealed too much, gone too far. But it was too late. The truth was out raw and ugly and undeniable. I stared at my mother as the final piece clicked into place. The years of exclusion, the systematic erasure from family history, the casual cruelty disguised as concern, it had never been about my inadequacy. It had never been about protecting the family's image. It had never even been about the money. "You didn't exclude me because I wasn't good enough," I said slowly, each word weighted with the terrible clarity of understanding. "You excluded me because I reminded you of her." My mother's face crumpled just for a second before she pulled the mask back into place. But that second was enough. I'd seen the truth beneath the wound that had never healed the pain that had curdled into something toxic and destructive. She'd looked at me, her own daughter, and seen the woman who'd hurt her. And instead of healing from that hurt, instead of separating me from her trauma, she'd punished me for a face I'd been born with, a personality I'd inherited, a resemblance I couldn't control. I'd spent 37 years trying to earn my mother's love, never understanding that it was never available to me. Not because of anything I'd done, but because every time she looked at me, she saw Katherine Jenkins. And she hated me for it. The private room fell into a silence so complete I could hear my mother's breathing, shallow, rapid, the sound of someone on the edge of breaking apart. My words hung in the air between us like an indictment. "You excluded me because I reminded you of her." I watched Eleanor Montgomery's face as she studied my mother, and I saw something shift in her expression. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who understood what it meant to carry a wound so deep it changed the shape of everything around it. Eleanor had spent decades fighting to be taken seriously in rooms full of men who thought she didn't belong. She knew what that kind of sustained rejection could do to a person's soul. My mother's voice, when she finally spoke, was raw and stripped of the careful control she'd maintained for so long. "You don't understand what it was like." "Then tell me," I said quietly. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw my mother as someone other than the perfectly composed woman who'd spent decades arranging the world to her specifications. I saw someone wounded. Someone who'd been carrying pain for so long it had become part of her skeleton. "Every dinner," she began, her voice shaking. Katherine would correct my grammar. She'd do it so casually, as if she were helping, but everyone at the table would hear. "It's whom, dear, not who." "We don't say that here, Patricia." Every business meeting where I tried to contribute something, she'd smile that cold smile of hers and mention my humble background, as if my opinions couldn't possibly be valid because I'd grown up working class. She made sure everyone knew I wasn't born into this life, that I'd married into it, that I was an intruder in my own marriage. I could hear the decades of accumulated humiliation in her voice, see how each small cut had built into something that had never healed. "For 15 years, Patricia continued, she treated me like I was contaminating the Jenkins family just by existing in it. And I tried so hard. I learned which fork to use and which wine to order and how to talk about art and literature and all the things people in her world talked about. But it was never enough. I would never be enough. Not for her." "I'm sorry grandmother hurt you," I said, and I meant it. I could imagine it, young Patricia, maybe 22 years old, when she married my father, thrust into a world where she didn't know the rules and where her mother-in-law made sure she knew she didn't belong. "I truly am. But, Mom, I am not her. I'm your daughter. I was a child." Patricia shook her head, and I saw tears beginning to form in her eyes. "You don't. When you were 8 years old, Katherine started taking you to museums. Teaching you about art and business. Do you remember that?" I nodded. I remembered those afternoons with perfect clarity. They were some of the happiest memories of my childhood. "She said I was smart," I said softly. "That I could do anything." My mother's laugh was bitter broken. "Yes. She said the same things to you that she'd refused to say to me. She was patient with you when she was never patient with me. She invested time in you when she'd written me off as hopeless. She was everything to you that she'd never been to me. And her voice cracked. I hated you for it. The confession landed like a physical blow. I heard Claire gasp, saw my father drop his head into his hands. But I sat perfectly still, letting the words settle over me, this truth I'd always suspected but never had confirmed spoken aloud. My mother had hated me since childhood, not because of anything I'd done or failed to do, not because I was difficult or disappointing, but because I looked like Catherine. Because I'd been born with a face that reminded her of every humiliation she'd endured. Because my grandmother had loved me in ways she'd never loved Patricia, and Patricia couldn't forgive me for that. I felt Eleanor's hand reach across the table and squeeze mine, a silent message of solidarity, of understanding. I squeezed back, grateful for that small gesture of support, even as something inside me was breaking. Because this was the answer I'd been seeking my entire life. Why my mother looked at me with such coldness. Why nothing I did was ever quite right. Why I'd been systematically erased from family history. It wasn't about me at all. It had never been about me. I was just collateral damage in a war that had ended before I was born. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to steady myself. So, you took grandmother's inheritance away from me. You forged my signature. You told everyone I didn't care about the family. You erased me from family photos and gatherings and histories. My voice was quiet, but each word was deliberate, factual. You did to me exactly what grandmother did to you. You made me feel like I didn't belong. You made me feel worthless. You made me invisible. Patricia opened her mouth to argue, to deflect, but I wasn't finished. The difference is, I continued, I was your daughter. You were supposed to protect me from that kind of pain, not inflict it. You knew what it felt like to be treated like you didn't matter. You lived through 15 years of that. And instead of making sure your daughter never felt that way, instead of breaking that cycle, you became her. The truth of that statement hung in the air between us. I watched it sink in, watched my mother's face crumple as she realized what she'd done. That in trying to protect herself from Catherine's ghost, she'd become exactly the kind of person Catherine had been. Cruel in small ways. Excluding. Diminishing. Erasing. Patricia began to cry. Then harsh, ugly sobs she couldn't control. Not delicate tears that could be dabbed away with a napkin, but the kind of crying that comes from something breaking deep inside. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost wanted to reach across the table and offer comfort. Because I understood now. Understood that she'd been hurt, and had never healed, that she'd carried that wound until it poisoned everything around it, that she'd been drowning in her own pain for so long she couldn't see the damage she was doing to others. But understanding wasn't forgiveness, and compassion for her pain didn't erase what she'd done to me. I stood up slowly, placed both hands on the table. My voice was calm, steady, completely clear. I'm going to contact Martin Becker, the lawyer who sent me that letter. I'm going to ask him to investigate how my signature was forged and who forged it. I'm going to pursue every legal option available to recover what was stolen from me. Patricia looked up at me through her tears, horror dawning on her face as she realized I wasn't going to let this go. That I wasn't going to accept her tears as payment for 12 years of theft and betrayal. And then, I continued, we'll let the courts decide what happens next. I remained standing for a moment, letting my words settle over the room. The dinner was effectively over. There would be no dessert course, no after-dinner drinks, no carefully orchestrated conversation about art and philanthropy. I detonated a bomb in the middle of my mother's perfectly planned evening, and there was no pretending we could simply continue with the meal. Patricia was crying too hard to speak. Robert stood and helped her to her feet, his face ashen. He wouldn't meet my eyes as he guided her toward the door. My mother stumbled once, and I felt a flicker of something, not quite sympathy, but something adjacent to it. She looked smaller, somehow diminished. The powerful woman who'd controlled every aspect of our family for decades had been reduced to someone who could barely walk without support. but I couldn't let myself feel sorry for her. Not after what she'd done. Not after 37 years. Claire remained at the table, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. David stood beside her, one hand on her back, but he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe. Or possibly just shock at what he'd witnessed. Eleanor Montgomery touched my elbow gently. "Amanda, could I speak with you for a moment?" "Privately." I nodded and followed her away from the table toward the corner of the private dining room where we could have a measure of privacy. Harrison was already gathering their things, giving us space. "Ms. Jenkins," Eleanor began, her voice formal, but not cold. "I want you to know that my family will cooperate fully with any investigation you choose to pursue." "I appreciate that, Mrs. Montgomery. I didn't mean to involve your family in this. I'm sorry you had to witness—" "Don't apologize." Her voice was firm. "What I witnessed tonight was deeply troubling. If your signature was forged, if you were deliberately denied your inheritance for 12 years, that's not just a family matter or a personal dispute. That's a crime. Fraud. Possibly multiple felonies." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had steel in it. "I will not associate my family with criminals. I will not have my son connected to a family that engages in that kind of behavior. So yes, we will cooperate. Fully." I felt something in my chest loosen slightly. I hadn't realized how alone I'd felt in this until someone offered to stand beside me. "Call me Eleanor." She continued, her expression softening just slightly. "And I want you to know I respect what you did tonight. It took courage to walk into this room knowing what you were about to reveal. Too many people stay silent when they're wronged. They let fear or guilt or misplaced loyalty keep them from fighting for what's theirs. I'm glad you're not one of them." She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card, pressing it into my hand. "This is my personal attorney, Richard Chen. He specializes in estate law and fraud cases. Tell him I sent you. He owes me several favors, and I'm calling one in for you." I looked down at the card, my vision blurring slightly. "Thank you," I managed. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did." Eleanor's voice was quiet but certain. "I spent 30 years watching men try to exclude me from rooms I'd earned my way into. I watched them forge documents, manipulate records, rewrite history to erase women's contributions. I won't stand by and watch a mother do the same thing to her own daughter." After the Montgomerys left, Harrison nodding to me with something like respect, Eleanor squeezing my hand one last time, I walked out toward the parking lot. The December air was cold and sharp, clearing some of the fog from my head. I was emotionally exhausted, wrung out, but also strangely relieved. The secret was out. The lie was exposed. I could stop carrying the weight of it alone. "Amanda, wait, please." I turned to see Claire hurrying toward me, her makeup ruined from crying, her carefully styled hair falling out of its pins. She looked nothing like the polished woman who'd sat down to dinner 2 hours ago. She looked broken. "Amanda, I swear I didn't know," she said, words tumbling out in a rush. "Not until last week. I overheard Mom on the phone talking about a will from 2013, and I Googled it and found the probate records, and I should have called you immediately. I should have told you right away, but I was scared and I didn't know what to do, and—" I held up a hand, cutting off the flow of words. "Claire, did you benefit from the inheritance that should have been mine?" She froze, her eyes going wide. Mom transferred some shares to me 3 years ago. 10% of Jenkins Holdings. She said it was a gift. She said it was time I had a stake in the family business." "Those shares weren't hers to give," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building in my chest. "They were mine. Which means for 3 years you've been profiting from something that was stolen from me. You've been collecting dividends, voting on company decisions, claiming ownership of assets that weren't yours." Claire's face crumpled. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know they came from—" "But you suspected," I interrupted. "Last week when you found those probate records, you knew something was wrong. You knew Mom had lied. And what did you do? You texted me and told me not to come to Christmas. You tried to keep me away so you wouldn't have to face this." I was trying to protect you. No. My voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. You were trying to protect yourself and Mom. You made a choice, Claire. You chose to stay silent. That's complicity. I turned toward my car. Done with this conversation, done with this entire evening. But something made me pause and look back at my sister, who was crying silently in the parking lot of a 5-star restaurant where our family had just imploded. If you want to make this right, I said quietly, there's one thing you can do. When the investigators come, and they will come, tell the truth, all of it. Don't protect her. Don't minimize what happened. Don't try to make excuses. Just tell the truth. Claire nodded, mascara running down her face, but didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. I got in my car and started the engine, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I sat there for a moment, letting the heater warm the cold interior, trying to process everything that had just happened. I'd walked into that dinner knowing I was going to blow up my family. But knowing it and experiencing it were two different things. My phone rang, the sound jarring in the quiet car. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code, same as Martin Becker's office. I answered. Amanda Jenkins. Ms. Jenkins, this is Martin Becker. I apologize for calling so late on Christmas Eve, but I just received a very interesting phone call from Eleanor Montgomery. She said you might need my services sooner than we'd planned. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the seat. Yes, Mr. Becker. I think the next phase of this case just began. 2 days after Christmas, I drove to Martin Becker's office in downtown San Francisco. The building was old, but well-maintained, the kind of place where established lawyers practiced the kind of law that didn't require flashy advertising. 3rd floor frosted glass door with gold lettering, Becker and Associates Estate, Planning and Probate Law. Martin Becker was exactly what I'd expected from our phone conversations, 68 years old, silver hair, wearing a suit that had probably cost more than my first car, but had clearly been tailored 15 years ago and maintained impeccably. He had the look of someone who'd seen every variation of human greed and family betrayal, and was no longer surprised by any of it. Ms. Jenkins, he said, standing to shake my hand when his assistant showed me into his office. I'm relieved you finally contacted me. I've been searching for you for 12 years. His office was lined with law books and file cabinets, the desk covered with documents. I recognized immediately copies of the same papers that had arrived in my mail 3 weeks ago. He gestured for me to sit in one of the leather chairs across from his desk, then began spreading documents across the surface between us. I want to walk you through exactly what happened, he said. Not the emotional aspects, those are between you and your family, but the legal mechanics, the timeline, because what your mother did was systematic and carefully planned. He laid out the first document, my grandmother's will, the original. Your grandmother filed this will 6 months before she died, March 15, 2013. It was properly notarized, properly witnessed by 2 individuals with no financial interest in the estate, completely legal and binding under California law. I studied the signatures at the bottom, my grandmother's handwriting still strong and clear. 2 witnesses I didn't recognize, a notary stamp. When she passed away on June 18, 2013, I initiated probate as executor of her estate. That's standard procedure. California law requires that all named beneficiaries be notified within a specific time frame. He pulled out another document, a certified mail receipt. I sent letters to your last known address. This was the address your grandmother had in her files, your apartment near Berkeley where you'd lived during business school. I'd already moved by then, I said. I got a job in San Francisco right after graduation and gave up that apartment in May. Martin nodded. The letters were returned as undeliverable, so I did what the law requires. I attempted to contact you through family members. He looked at me over his reading glasses. I called your parents' house, spoke to your mother. She told me you'd moved abroad, that you were traveling extensively for work, that the family didn't have a current address or phone number for you. She said you'd made it clear you wanted to live independently and preferred minimal family contact. I felt my jaw tighten. Even then, even in that moment when she could have simply given him my phone number, She'd chosen deception. "Did you believe her?" I asked. "I had no reason not to," Martin said simply. Adult children estranging themselves from families is unfortunately common, especially in wealthy families where inheritance disputes can be contentious. And your mother was very convincing. She seemed concerned about you, worried that involving you in estate matters might be stressful given your emotional state. My emotional state. She said you'd had a difficult relationship with your grandmother, that you'd deliberately distanced yourself from the family, that contacting you about the inheritance might reopen old wounds. He paused. In January 2014, she filed this. He slid the disclaimer of inheritance across the desk. I'd seen a copy before, but looking at it now in Martin's office with all the other documents spread around it, I felt physically sick. There was my name typed at the top, Amanda Catherine Jenkins, and at the bottom a signature that looked almost like mine. Almost, but not quite. The loops were too wide, the slant too steep. I compared this to documents I had with your grandmother's signature, Martin said quietly. They're quite similar, your grandmother's handwriting and this forged signature. I believe your mother traced your grandmother's signature as a template and then modified it slightly to appear as if it were your handwriting. It's actually quite sophisticated. You suspected it was forged. I suspected, he admitted. But suspicion isn't proof, and without you to confirm that you hadn't signed it, I had no legal standing to challenge the document. Your mother also provided these. He laid out printed emails, each one supposedly from an email address I'd never seen before. The content made my stomach turn. I want nothing to do with the Jenkins family or their money. Please don't contact me about estate matters. Whatever my grandmother left should go to my sister. She's the one who stayed. I never wrote those, I said. I know. I had them analyzed by a digital forensics expert last week after Mrs. Montgomery called me. The email account was created in January 2014 and deleted in February 2014. Only 3 emails were ever sent from it all to my office. The IP address traces back to your parents' home in Pacific Heights. The systematic nature of it took my breath away. This wasn't impulse. This wasn't panic. This was calculated fraud planned and executed over weeks. What happened after the disclaimer was filed? I asked, though I thought I knew. Martin pulled out a bank statement. Once the probate court accepted the disclaimer, your 40% stake passed to your father as next of kin under California intestacy law. Within 6 months, he'd transferred 30% to your mother. Here you can see the company records and 10% to Claire. They restructured the entire company to erase any evidence that you'd ever been entitled to anything. I stared at the numbers. $8 million in 2013 plus 12 years of appreciation and dividends. The total value now would be closer to $15 million. Martin leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. Ms. Jenkins, I need you to understand what we're dealing with here. This isn't just a civil matter. Forging signatures on legal documents is a felony under California Penal Code Section 470. Deceiving the court with fraudulent documents is another felony. The fraudulent transfer of assets could constitute grand theft. If we pursue this fully, your mother could face criminal charges. Prison time is a real possibility. I thought about my mother crying at the restaurant, thought about her confession about grandmother Catherine's cruelty, the 15 years of being made to feel worthless. Thought about the generational trauma that had poisoned everything it touched. But then, I thought about 37 years of being erased, of being told I wasn't worthy of belonging to my own family, of missing birthdays and holidays and weddings, of learning that my grandmother had loved me, had tried to provide for me, and having that stolen by the woman who should have protected me most. I want to pursue every legal option available, I said. Martin nodded slowly. Then let's begin. After my meeting with Martin Becker, I knew I had 2 choices. I could let the lawyers handle everything from this point forward, communicate only through legal documents and court filings, or I could face my parents one more time. Not for their sake, but for mine. I needed to hear the truth directly from them, needed to understand. really understand how a mother could do what Patricia had done. So on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days after Christmas, I drove to the house in Pacific Heights where I'd grown up. I hadn't been here in 8 years. The last time was for Grandmother Catherine's funeral, and even then I'd stayed for less than an hour before making an excuse and leaving. The house looked exactly the same. Perfectly maintained Victorian facade, immaculate garden lawn, manicured to an almost aggressive degree of precision. Patricia's need for control extended to every blade of grass, every trimmed hedge. Nothing was allowed to be out of place. I rang the doorbell rather than using my old key. I wasn't family anymore. I was a visitor. Or maybe an adversary. Patricia opened the door and her face went pale when she saw me standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Amanda, what are you doing here? I thought we should be talking through lawyers now." "I'm not here to negotiate," I said quietly. "I'm here to understand. I need to hear it from you directly, not filtered through attorneys and legal documents. Why did you do it? And I want the real answer this time, not the performance you gave at the restaurant." She hesitated, then stepped back to let me in. The house smelled the same, some expensive candle scent Patricia had probably ordered from a boutique in Nob Hill. Everything was as pristine as I remembered. Not a cushion out of place, not a surface that hadn't been recently dusted. We walked to the living room, the formal one with the uncomfortable antique furniture that we'd never been allowed to use as children because it was too nice for every day. Patricia sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid. I took the chair across from her, the same chair where I used to sit during those rare family meetings when I was summoned to be told about some disappointment I'd caused. "Your grandmother made my life hell." Patricia began, her voice quiet but intense. "From the day I married your father until the day she died, she found ways to remind me I wasn't good enough." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "Do you know what it's like to be told in your own home that you don't belong?" Patricia's hands twisted in her lap. Every dinner party she'd critique my grammar. "It's whom, Patricia, not who." "We don't use that expression here." She'd do it in front of guests, in front of your father's business associates, making sure everyone knew I hadn't been educated properly. She'd tell stories about my background, the diner, where I waitressed, the community college, where I'd gone before I met Robert, my father's job driving a delivery truck. She'd laugh as she told these stories as if my past was amusing, quaint, a curiosity. I could hear the decades of accumulated pain in her voice, see it in the way she couldn't meet my eyes. She'd take your father aside and say things like, "I don't know what you see in her, Robert. She's not our kind of people." And he'd defend me, but weakly, always weakly, because some part of him wondered if she was right. Patricia's voice cracked. "For 15 years, I tried to become what she wanted. I took etiquette classes. I read the books she recommended. I learned about art and opera and all the things people in her world valued. But it was never enough. I would never be enough. Not for her." "And then I was born," I said softly. "And then you were born." Patricia finally looked at me. "You came out looking exactly like her. Same dark eyes, same sharp features. When you were a baby, people would say, 'Oh, she's the spitting image of Catherine.' And Catherine would smile and say, 'Yes, finally someone in this family with good genetics.'" I felt something twist in my chest. I'd never heard that story before. "As you grew up, you became more like her, confident, certain. You'd ask questions that challenged adults, form opinions that weren't just echoes of what you'd been told. You were 8 years old, and already you had more self-assurance than I'd ever had in my life." Patricia's voice was thick with emotion now. "And Catherine adored you. She'd take you to museums and teach you about business and tell you that you could do anything, be anything. She was patient with you in ways she'd never been with me. She invested time in you when she'd written me off as hopeless." "I know it's not rational," Patricia continued. "I know you're not her. I know you were just a child who didn't deserve to be punished for looking like someone else. but every time I looked at you, I saw 15 years of humiliation. I saw the woman who made me feel worthless, who treated me like I was contaminating her family just by existing in it. And I couldn't separate you from that pain. I tried. God help me, I tried. The door opened and my father walked in. Robert Jenkins looked older than I remembered, more stooped, as if the weight of his choices had physically bent him. He stopped when he saw me, then slowly entered the room. "I should have stopped her," he said without preamble. "In 2014, when Patricia first showed me the disclaimer of inheritance, I knew something was wrong. The timing was too convenient. Your signature looked slightly off. I asked Patricia if you'd actually signed it." "What did she say?" I asked. "She said yes. She said she'd contacted you through a mutual friend, that you'd signed it and returned it, that you wanted nothing to do with the family or the inheritance." He sat down heavily in a chair. "I didn't push further because I didn't want to know if she was lying. Because if she was lying, then I'd be responsible for stopping her. And I didn't want that responsibility." "So you chose willful ignorance," I said. "Yes." He didn't try to defend himself. "I failed you. Not just in this, but in everything. I let your mother write you out of our family history. I let you be excluded from gatherings and photos and holidays. I told myself it was complicated, that you'd chosen to distance yourself, that it was easier for everyone if we just let you go your own way. I looked at this man who was supposed to be my father, who'd read me bedtime stories when I was little, who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd stood silently by while his wife erased me from existence. "Dad," I asked quietly, "did you ever actually want me in your life? Or was I always just collateral damage in the war between Mom and grandmother?" The silence stretched between us. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his hands, looked at his wife, looked everywhere except at me. And in that silence, I found my answer. I left my parents' house without saying goodbye. There was nothing left to say. My father's silence had answered every question I'd needed answered. I drove home on autopilot, navigating San Francisco's streets without really seeing them. My mind replaying that moment, the way he'd looked everywhere except at me, the way he'd chosen silence over honesty one more time. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't drink and sat on my couch staring at nothing for what might have been 10 minutes or an hour. Finally, I walked to my desk and pulled out the envelope Martin Becker had sent me. Not the legal documents this time, but the personal letter tucked inside. The one from Grandmother Catherine. I'd read it a dozen times since receiving it 3 weeks ago, but each time I found something new in it, some layer of meaning I'd missed before. It was 5 pages handwritten on her personal stationery, the expensive kind with her monogram embossed at the top. Her handwriting was elegant but shaky in places, evidence of the illness that would take her life 2 weeks after she wrote these words. "My dearest Amanda," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've grown into the remarkable woman I always knew you'd become. I'm writing to explain why I'm leaving you my portion of the family business. It's not about money, though. I hope the financial security helps you build the life you deserve. It's about breaking a cycle." My hands shook as I read, even though I'd memorized these words by now. Each time they hit differently. Tonight, after confronting my parents, after hearing my mother's pain and my father's cowardice, the letter felt heavier somehow. More complicated. "I was not a kind woman to your mother," Catherine had written. "I need you to know that. When your father married Patricia, I saw her as beneath us, beneath him. She came from a working-class family, had worked as a waitress, hadn't received the education I deemed appropriate for a Jenkins wife. And I made sure she knew how I felt. I was cruel in small, cutting ways that couldn't be called abuse, but accumulated into something just as damaging. I criticized her grammar, her manners, her background. I made her feel unwelcome in her own home. I told myself I was protecting my son, maintaining family standards. But the truth is simpler and uglier. I did to her what my mother-in-law did to me 50 years earlier." I paused here, as I always did, struck by the self-awareness in those words. Catherine had understood exactly what she'd done and why. "That's the cycle, Amanda," the letter continued. Hurting women, passing down pain like an inheritance more valuable than money. My mother-in-law made me feel small, so I made Patricia feel small. It's a vicious, stupid pattern, and I participated in it fully even as I told myself I was different, better justified. The next part was what had made me cry the first time I read it. "When you were born, I saw a chance to do better. You looked like me, same eyes, same features, and I poured into you all the love and encouragement I'd withheld from your mother. I took you to museums. I taught you about business and art. I told you that you were brilliant and capable and could accomplish anything. I thought I was being redemptive, making up for my mistakes by investing in the next generation. I realize now I was being vindictive. Every moment I spent praising you was another moment reminding Patricia that she wasn't worthy of that same attention. Every time I told you that you were special, I was implicitly telling her that she wasn't." I set the letter down and took a shaky breath. This was the hardest part to read Catherine's clear-eyed acknowledgement that she'd used me as a weapon against my mother. Not intentionally, maybe, but the effect was the same. "Your mother will hate you for resembling me," Catherine had written. "I'm sorry for that. It's my fault, not yours, but you're the one who will pay the price. I considered changing my will, spreading the assets more evenly, trying to make amends financially. But I realized Patricia doesn't need more money or control. What she needs is therapy, healing the courage to face her wounds instead of passing them down. And if I gave her power over my assets, she'd use them to perpetuate the same dynamics, rewarding the compliant daughter, punishing the independent one, maintaining control through financial leverage." This was the part that had made me angry at first. It felt arrogant, presumptuous. Who was Catherine to decide what Patricia needed? "But you, Amanda." The letter continued, "You have the strength to be different. You're independent enough not to let money define you, but you'll appreciate the security it provides. You're compassionate enough to understand your mother's pain, but strong enough not to let it destroy you. Don't use this inheritance to hurt anyone. Use it to heal. Use it to build something better. Use it to be the woman I should have been, but wasn't." The letter's final paragraph had been sealed with wax, as if Catherine wanted to make sure these words stayed private. "I'm dying with regrets, my dear. I regret how I treated your mother. I regret that my love for you came at her expense. I regret that I'm leaving you to clean up my mess, and make no mistake, this is a mess. Patricia will fight you. She'll try to keep this inheritance from you, not because she needs the money, but because letting you have it means admitting that I valued you more than I valued her. That admission will be intolerable to her. I regret putting you in this position, but I don't regret believing in you. Use this gift wisely. Be kinder than I was. Be stronger than she is. And most importantly, break the cycle. Because if you don't, it will continue through your children and your children's children, this pattern of hurt women creating hurt women. Someone has to be brave enough to stop it. I hope it's you." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. My vision was blurred with tears, not tears of sadness exactly, but tears of understanding. Because now I saw all of them clearly. Catherine, who'd been cruel because she'd been taught cruelty. Patricia, who'd been wounded and had turned her wounds into weapons. My father, who'd enabled everything through his silence. And me caught in the middle of a war that started before I was born. Part of me wanted to let it go. Wanted to walk away from the inheritance, from the lawsuit, from all of it. Take my carefully built life and return to the quiet anonymity I'd cultivated. My grandmother's letter made it clear that pursuing this would hurt people. People who were already hurting people who'd been damaged by the same cycles they were perpetuating. But then I thought about the last line, "Someone has to be brave enough to stop it." And I realized understanding everyone's pain doesn't mean accepting everyone's choices. Compassion doesn't require allowing myself to be erased. Breaking the cycle means holding people accountable even when you understand why they did what they did. Especially then. Because cycles don't break themselves. Martin Becker moved quickly. 2 days after I sat in his office and told him I wanted to pursue every legal option, he filed a civil lawsuit in San Francisco Superior Court. I received a courtesy copy of the complaint before it was filed. 43 pages of legal language that boiled down to a simple accusation my family had committed fraud to steal my inheritance. Amanda C. Jenkins versus Patricia Jenkins. Robert Jenkins and Claire Montgomery née Jenkins. The complaint alleged fraud, forgery, conversion of assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. Martin had been thorough, documenting every step of the deception: the forged disclaimer, the fake emails, the systematic transfer of assets, 12 years of dividends that should have been mine. Within 24 hours, the story broke in the San Francisco Chronicle. A paralegal at the court had apparently tipped off a reporter. These things had a way of leaking when prominent families were involved. The headline read, "Venture capitalist sues family over hidden $8 inheritance." By afternoon, my phone was ringing constantly. Colleagues calling to ask if I was okay, reporters wanting statements. Even a few old friends from college who I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly concerned about my well-being. I ignored most of the calls and sent a brief statement through Martin. "This is a private family matter that we're addressing through appropriate legal channels. I have no further comment at this time." But the damage, or perhaps the exposure, was done. The case was public now. There was no going back to quiet resolution, no possibility of settling this behind closed doors. The legal community was watching. The business community was watching. And my family, I knew, was scrambling. Patricia retaliated within 48 hours. Her lawyer was a man named Gerald Haverford, who had a reputation for aggressive defense tactics and winning cases other lawyers considered unwinnable. Martin had warned me about him. "He's very good at what he does," Martin had said, "which means this is going to get ugly." Haverford filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that I'd waited too long to bring my claim. The legal brief was scathing in its characterization of me. Plaintiff waited 12 years to challenge the disclaimer, during which time she had every opportunity to investigate her grandmother's estate. Her delay prejudices my clients who relied in good faith on legal documents filed with the court. She cannot now seek to undo years of settled expectations simply because she belatedly decides she's unhappy with the outcome. Martin's response was equally forceful. "Ms. Jenkins only discovered the fraud 3 weeks ago. The statute of limitations doesn't begin until the injured party has knowledge of the harm." The defendants deliberately kept Ms. Jenkins ignorant of her rights through systematic deception, including forged documents and fabricated communications. They cannot now benefit from their own fraudulent conduct by claiming the passage of time shields them from accountability. The judge assigned to our case was Rebecca Chen, a woman in her 50s, who'd made her reputation as a tough but fair arbiter of complex civil litigation. She scheduled a hearing for mid-January to review the motion to dismiss, stating in her order that she wanted to see forensic evidence regarding the alleged forgery before making any determination. Meanwhile, the legal machinery ground forward. Martin subpoenaed documents from Jenkins Holdings, corporate records, bank statements, emails. He subpoenaed records from the probate court, and most significantly, he subpoenaed Claire to give a deposition. I wasn't there for Claire's deposition. Martin advised me that my presence might be inflammatory, but he called me afterwards to brief me on what had happened. "She was terrified," Martin said, shaking the entire time. Her lawyer was a young associate who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "What did she say?" "She admitted she didn't know about the will until recently. Said she overheard your mother on the phone with a lawyer last week, and that's when she started putting pieces together. But when I asked her about the shares she received 3 years ago, the 10% stake in Jenkins Holdings, she couldn't give a satisfactory answer." Martin paused, and I could hear papers rustling on his end. I asked her if she'd questioned where those shares came from, if she'd asked your mother how she was able to transfer such a significant asset, and she said no. She said she didn't want to know. Those were her exact words. I closed my eyes, feeling a complicated mix of anger and something that might have been pity. Claire had known something was wrong. Maybe not the specifics, maybe not the full extent of the fraud, but she'd known enough to ask questions. And she'd chosen not to. That evening, while I was trying to focus on work and failing miserably, my phone rang. It was Claire. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Amanda." Her voice was thick with tears. "David knows. About the deposition, about the shares, about everything. He's so angry with me." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? He said I chose to ignore what I suspected because it benefited me. And he's right. He's completely right. She was crying now. Harsh sobs that made her words almost unintelligible. "I'm going to lose him. I'm going to lose everything. The Montgomerys are reevaluating their relationship with our family. His mother won't take my calls." "Claire," I said quietly, "you made choices. You have to live with the consequences." I know. I'm going to make this right. I'm going to cooperate fully with your lawyer. I'm going to return the shares, all of them. I'll sign whatever documents you need. I need you to know I'm sorry. I should have done this 12 years ago. I should have done it the moment I suspected something was wrong." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have." There was a long silence. Then Claire said, her voice barely a whisper, "She called me tonight, Mom. She told me that if I testify against her, I'm no longer her daughter, that I'm choosing you over her, and she'll never forgive me." I felt my chest tighten. Of course Patricia had done that. Of course she'd try to manipulate Claire one more time using the only leverage she had left, the threat of losing her mother's love. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I was going to tell the truth." Claire's voice was stronger now. "And then she hung up on me." For the first time since this entire nightmare began, I felt something close to respect for my sister. It had taken her far too long to find her courage, but she'd found it. "Claire," I said, "the truth is all I've ever wanted." I underestimated my mother. I thought once the lawsuit was filed, once the truth was exposed in court documents, the battle would be primarily legal. I was wrong. Patricia understood something I didn't. In San Francisco society, reputation matters as much as reality. Maybe more. 3 days after Claire's deposition, an article appeared in Bay Area Lifestyle magazine. The headline read, "A Mother's Heartbreak. Patricia Jenkins opens up about estranged daughter's lawsuit." Martin called me the moment he saw it. "Don't read it," he advised. "It's a PR hit piece designed to undermine your credibility. Nothing in it changes the legal facts of our case." I read it anyway. The article was masterful in its manipulation. There was a photo of my mother sitting in the formal living room looking elegant and heartbroken. The lighting was perfect, soft, flattering, making her look vulnerable rather than villainous. She was quoted extensively, and every word was carefully chosen to paint me as the aggressor and herself as the wounded party. "Amanda was always such an independent child," Patricia was quoted as saying. "Even as a teenager, she struggled with family closeness. She'd retreat to her room, avoid gatherings. We tried to give her space, tried to respect her need for autonomy. But when she cut off contact after college, it broke my heart. I've spent years hoping she'd come back to us." The article mentioned my troubled adolescence, my difficulty maintaining relationships, my tendency toward conflict. It quoted anonymous family friends who said I'd always been the difficult one, compared to my sweet, accommodating sister Claire. The genius of it was that nothing was technically a lie. I had been independent as a child. I did retreat to my room because being around my mother was painful. I did avoid gatherings because I wasn't wanted at them. But the way the article framed these facts made me sound unstable, difficult, unreasonable. "Now she's returned after years of silence to make financial demands," Patricia was quoted. "I understand she's struggling. The venture capital industry can be very stressful. But to accuse me of—" Here the article said Mrs. Jenkins became too emotional to continue. By the next morning, the article had been shared hundreds of times on social media. It was discussed in the comments sections of local news sites, dissected in Facebook groups dedicated to Bay Area society. People who'd never met me were forming opinions about my character, my motives, my mental stability. At Vanguard Capital, I felt the shift immediately. Colleagues who'd been supportive became carefully neutral. People stopped making eye contact in the hallway. When I walked into the break room, conversations would pause awkwardly. 2 days after the article appeared, my boss Richard called me into his office. "Amanda, I need to ask you something directly. Is this family situation going to become a distraction?" I wanted to scream. Wanted to explain that I was the victim here, that my mother had committed fraud, that I had every right to pursue justice. But Richard's expression told me that wasn't what he wanted to hear. "It won't affect my work," I said, keeping my voice level. "See that it doesn't." He tapped a pen against his desk. "We have clients who value discretion. The firm's reputation is built on trustworthiness. When one of our senior people is involved in public litigation, particularly litigation involving family and accusations of impropriety, it raises questions." "I'm not accused of anything," I pointed out. "I'm the plaintiff. I'm the one who was wronged." "I understand that. But perception matters in our industry. I'm not asking you to drop the case, that's your personal decision. I'm just saying we need to be mindful of how this reflects on the firm." It wasn't a threat exactly, but it wasn't support either. I left his office feeling more alone than I had since this entire nightmare began. That evening, another article appeared, this time in the San Francisco Chronicle. The headline read, "Montgomery Matriarch Backs Estate Fraud Claims Against Jenkins Family." Eleanor Montgomery had launched a counter-offensive. The article quoted her extensively about the Christmas Eve dinner. She described my mother's text message banning me from the event. She recounted the moment I'd walked into the room and the immediate shift in dynamics when Harrison recognized me as a respected professional colleague rather than the embarrassing daughter my mother had described. "I was there," Eleanor was quoted. "I witnessed Patricia Jenkins tell her daughter she wasn't welcome at a family gathering because her presence would be shameful. I watched her face when Amanda produced evidence of a will that had been hidden for 12 years. Patricia Jenkins is not a grieving mother dealing with a difficult daughter. She's a woman who was caught in a lie and is now trying to manipulate public opinion to cover her tracks." The article mentioned Eleanor's long career as a CEO, her reputation for integrity, her standing in the business community. Her words carried weight. Significant weight. By the next day, San Francisco society had split into camps. Some people believed my mother's version, the heartbroken parent wronged by an ungrateful child. Others believed Eleanor's account, the sophisticated older woman who'd witnessed fraud firsthand. Social media debates raged. Legal blogs analyzed the case. I was mentioned by name in articles I never read, discussed by people who'd never met me. The scrutiny was exhausting. I followed Martin's advice and gave no interviews, issued no statements beyond the initial brief comment. "Let the evidence speak," he'd said. But evidence spoke in courtrooms, not in public opinion, and the court of public opinion was currently tearing me apart. I stopped reading the articles, stopped checking social media, stopped engaging with anything beyond work and the lawsuit. But I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me. The professional pressure, the public scrutiny, the family betrayal, the sheer exhaustion of fighting for something that should have been mine all along. One night, sitting alone in my apartment with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, I thought about dropping everything, about calling Martin and telling him to withdraw the lawsuit, about taking what was left of my quiet life and disappearing back into anonymity, about letting my mother keep the money she'd stolen if it meant I could stop being discussed in society pages and scrutinized by colleagues and dissected by strangers online. I picked up my phone, started to dial Martin's number. Then I thought about 37 years of being erased, about being told I wasn't worthy of belonging to my own family, about that little girl who'd spent her childhood trying desperately to earn her mother's love and never understanding why it wasn't available. I put the phone down and called Martin with a different question. "When's the next hearing?" "January 15th, he said. "Judge Chen will rule on the motion to dismiss. We'll also present our forensic evidence regarding the forged signature." "Good," I said. "I'll be there." What I didn't know, what Martin didn't know yet, was that Patricia had one more card to play, a dangerous one that she'd been holding in reserve, waiting for exactly the right moment. And that moment was coming. 3 days before the January 15th hearing, Martin called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Patricia's lawyer filed a motion this morning. They're seeking to subpoena your medical records from Dr. Sarah Chen." For a moment, I couldn't process what he'd said. "My therapist. From 15 years ago. Yes, they're arguing that your mental health history is relevant to the case. Specifically, they claim it speaks to whether you were competent to manage a large inheritance and whether Catherine Jenkins was misguided in leaving you such significant assets. They're suggesting that your mother's decision to hide the will was actually protective, that she was shielding you from responsibility you weren't equipped to handle." I sat down heavily on my couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Dr. Sarah Chen had been my lifeline when I was 22 years old. I'd started seeing her right after I'd moved to San Francisco, right after I'd made the final decision to distance myself from my family. I'd been so depressed I could barely get out of bed some mornings. I'd told Dr. Chen things I'd never told anyone, about feeling worthless, about wondering if my family would even notice if I disappeared, about darker thoughts I'd barely admitted to myself. "They can't do that," I said, my voice shaking. "Therapy records are privileged." "They are," Martin agreed. "And we're going to fight this subpoena aggressively. But Amanda, I need you to understand what's happening here. This is desperation. When defendants can't address the evidence against them, they attack the plaintiff's character instead. It's actually a sign we're winning, but that doesn't mean it won't be painful. If the judge allows it." I couldn't finish the sentence. "If Judge Chen allows it, and I don't think she will, but if she does, the records would become part of the court file, which means they'd be accessible to the media. The Bay Area lifestyle article would look like a love letter compared to what they'd write about unstable venture capitalist Sue's family." I closed my eyes, feeling physically sick. Everything I'd worked so hard to build, my professional reputation, my carefully constructed life, my privacy, could be destroyed by my mother's desperation to avoid accountability. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Dr. Chen herself. "Amanda, I received a subpoena this morning for your therapy records from 2010 and 2011. I want you to know I'm fighting this with everything I have. This is a gross violation of medical ethics and patient confidentiality. My lawyer is already preparing a motion to quash." "Thank you," I managed, "but I need to warn you." Dr. Chen's voice was gentle but firm. "If somehow the judge does allow this, and I don't think she will, there are things in those notes that could be taken out of context. You were very honest with me about your struggles, about your family dynamics, your feelings of worthlessness, the depression that was so severe at times. You had thoughts of self-harm." My chest tightened. I remembered those sessions. Remembered sobbing in Dr. Chen's office, telling her I felt like a ghost in my own family, that sometimes I wondered if anyone would care if I simply ceased to exist. "You were never a danger to yourself," Dr. Chen continued. "You were processing trauma in a healthy way, in a therapeutic setting. But if someone wanted to twist those notes to pull out individual sentences without context, they could paint a picture of someone unstable, someone who shouldn't be trusted with financial decisions." After we hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, staring at nothing. My mother knew about Dr. Chen. I'd mentioned therapy once years ago, in a rare moment when I'd thought maybe we could have an honest conversation. Patricia had dismissed it. Therapy is for people who can't handle their own problems, and I'd never brought it up again. But she'd remembered, and now she was weaponizing the lowest point of my life. Martin called again that evening. "Amanda, we need to talk about strategy. I'm confident we can get this subpoena quashed, but you need to decide how you want to proceed if we don't. Are you willing to have your most private moments exposed, if that's what it takes to continue this case?" I didn't answer immediately. I got up, put on a jacket, and walked down to the Embarcadero. The fog was rolling in over the bay, obscuring the Golden Gate Bridge, turning the city into something ghostly and unreal. I walked for nearly an hour, my mind churning. I thought about my 22-year-old self, so broken by years of subtle rejection that she genuinely believed the world would be better off without her. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake, wondering what was wrong with me, why my own mother couldn't love me. I thought about finally finding Dr. Chen, finally having someone tell me that I wasn't broken, that the problem wasn't me, that I deserved better. I'd survived that darkness. I'd built a life worth living. I'd become successful, respected, whole. And now my mother wanted to drag me back into that pain, to use my healing journey as evidence that I was damaged goods. Part of me wanted to quit. Wanted to call Martin and tell him to withdraw the lawsuit, to let my mother keep the stolen inheritance if it meant I could keep my dignity, my privacy, my carefully reconstructed self. But another part of me, the part that sounded disturbingly like Grandmother Catherine, was furious. Because this was exactly what my mother did. She found your weakness, your vulnerability, your softest spot, and she pressed on it until you gave up, gave in, disappeared. How many times had I disappeared for her convenience? How many gatherings had I skipped? How many achievements had I downplayed? How many times had I made myself smaller so she could feel bigger? I thought about the letter Catherine had written. Someone has to be brave enough to break the cycle. And breaking the cycle meant not backing down when things got hard. It meant refusing to be shamed for having been hurt. It meant standing up and saying, yes, your rejection damaged me, and I sought help, and that makes me strong, not weak. I pulled out my phone and called Martin. Fight the subpoena as hard as you can, I said. But if we lose, if Judge Chen allows those records to be admitted. I want to testify. I want to explain exactly what was happening in my life 15 years ago that made me so depressed I needed professional help. I want to tell the court under oath who caused that pain and why. If my mother wants to make this about my mental health, fine. Let's talk about what damages mental health. Let's talk about being systematically erased by your own mother. There was a pause. Then Martin said quietly, "That's brave, Amanda, and risky. But if you're willing to do it, it could be powerful testimony." "I'm willing," I said, and meant it, because I was done protecting my mother from the consequences of her own actions. If she wanted to weaponize my pain, I'd show the court exactly where that pain came from. The night before the hearing on my therapy records, I thought I had everything under control. I'd prepared, mentally reviewed Martin's arguments, told myself I could handle whatever happened. I made dinner, poured a glass of wine, sat down on my couch with the intention of watching something mindless on television. And then I couldn't breathe. It came out of nowhere, or maybe it had been building for weeks, and I'd just been ignoring it. My chest tightened. The walls of my apartment seemed to press inward. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might be having a heart attack. I tried to take deep breaths the way Dr. Chen had taught me 15 years ago, but my lungs wouldn't cooperate. I was 22 years old again, sitting in that first therapy session, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. I was telling Dr. Chen about the family dinner where my mother had looked right through me as if I wasn't there, had talked about her daughter Claire without ever mentioning she had another daughter. I was admitting that sometimes I lay awake at night wondering if anyone would notice if I simply stopped existing. The memory was so vivid it felt real. I was back in that pain, that darkness, that absolute certainty that I was fundamentally unlovable. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my phone. I scrolled through my contacts and called Maria before I could talk myself out of it. "Amanda, what's wrong?" She picked up on the second ring, instantly alert. "Can you—" My voice cracked. "Can you come over? I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving now. 10 minutes. Breathe, okay, just keep breathing." Maria arrived in 20 minutes. She lived in Oakland. It should have taken 40, carrying takeout containers from my favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine. She took one look at me and set everything down, pulling me into a hug that finally made the tears come. I cried for what felt like hours. Maria didn't try to make me stop or tell me everything would be okay. She just held me and let me break apart. When I finally pulled away, my face swollen and my eyes burning, she guided me to the couch and opened the wine. "Tell me what you're really feeling," she said. "Not the brave version, the truth." And I did. For the first time since this nightmare began, I let myself say all the things I'd been afraid to admit, even to myself. "I don't know if I'm doing this for justice or revenge," I said, my voice hoarse. "I keep telling myself it's about accountability, about breaking cycles, about standing up for what's right. But what if I'm just angry? What if I'm just hurting people because I was hurt?" Maria listened, didn't interrupt. "My mother is awful," I continued. "She stole from me. She erased me. She forged my signature on legal documents. But she's also damaged. My grandmother was genuinely cruel to her. She was treated like she didn't belong for 15 years, and that pain turned into something toxic. And I feel like if I push this all the way, if I take it to trial and she ends up with a criminal record, possibly in jail, am I just continuing the cycle? Am I becoming another woman who hurts women?" I wiped my eyes, took a shaky breath. Maybe I should just let it go. Take the moral high road. Be the bigger person. Walk away and prove I'm better than all of this. Maria refilled my wine glass, took a sip from her own, and then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "If you quit now, will you regret it?" I sat with that question. Really sat with it. Not the answer I wanted to give, but the truth. "Yes," I finally admitted. "I'll regret it. Not because of the money. I genuinely don't care about the $8 million anymore. I've built a good life without it. But if I stop now, the message is that you can erase someone for 37 years, steal their inheritance, forge their signature, and face no consequences as long as you have a tragic enough backstory, as long as you can make yourself look like the victim." I looked at Maria, needing her to understand. "And the next time my mother decides someone is inconvenient, maybe it's Claire, maybe it's a grandchild someday, she'll do it again. Because she'll have learned that she can. That tears and trauma and playing the victim will let her get away with anything. The cycle continues. Breaking it means finishing this even when it's hard. Even when I'm exhausted. Even when I'm not sure I'm doing it for the right reasons." Maria nodded slowly. "Then you know what you have to do." "But I'm so tired," I whispered. "I'm so tired of being strong, of being the one who has to fight. I just want this to be over." "Then let it be over after the fight," Maria said. "But Amanda, you need to stop trying to be superhuman through this. You can't be strong Amanda who never breaks 24 hours a day. You're allowed to be scared. You're allowed to be angry and exhausted and uncertain. You're allowed to cry and scream and fall apart." She squeezed my hand. "You're allowed to be human. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. And as long as you get back up, which you always do, you're still fighting." I felt something loosen in my chest. Permission. Permission to not be perfect, to not have all the answers, to struggle with this impossible situation. "I'm here," Maria continued. "Martin's here. Eleanor Montgomery, weirdly enough, is on your side. You have people, Amanda. You're not alone in this." I hadn't realized how alone I'd felt until she said that. I'd been carrying this weight by myself, trying to be strong enough for everyone, never letting anyone see the cracks. But Maria was right, I had people. I didn't have to do this alone. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier now. "Okay. Tomorrow I go to court and I fight. Tonight I let myself be human. I let myself be scared and angry and exhausted. And I accept that those feelings don't make me weak." Maria smiled. "Tomorrow you're a warrior. Tonight you're just my friend who's going through hell and needs to eat pad thai and watch bad reality television." We did exactly that. We ate Thai food and watched 3 episodes of a show about people buying tiny houses. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or my mother or the hearing tomorrow. We just existed in the moment, two friends on a couch, and for a few hours I let myself not be Amanda Jenkins, the plaintiff, Amanda Jenkins, the victim, Amanda Jenkins, the fighter. I let myself just be Amanda. Scared, tired, uncertain Amanda who was doing her best in an impossible situation. When Maria left around midnight, she hugged me at the door. "You've got this," she said. "Not because you're perfect or strong or invincible, but because you're right. And sometimes that has to be enough." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning I dressed carefully, professional but not aggressive, a navy suit that made me look competent and calm, even though my hands were shaking. I drove to the courthouse, found parking, walked through the metal detectors. Martin was waiting for me in the hallway outside the courtroom. But he wasn't alone. Standing next to him, looking nervous but determined, was Claire. "Amanda," Martin said quietly, "your sister has something to tell you." Claire stood in the courthouse hallway looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her makeup was minimal. She was wearing a plain black dress instead of her usual designer outfits. She looked smaller, somehow younger, stripped of all the armor she usually wore. "What's going on?" I asked Martin, my eyes on my sister. "Claire contacted me yesterday evening," Martin explained quietly. "She wants to testify on your behalf. She's bringing documents, emails, bank statements, transfer records showing how your mother orchestrated the asset transfers. She's also willing to return all the shares she received and sign an affidavit confirming she had suspicions about the origin of those shares but chose not to investigate." I looked at Claire, who was staring at her hands, unable or unwilling to meet my eyes. "Why now?" I asked. Claire finally looked up. "Because I can't live with this anymore. Because David told me I have to choose who I want to be, Mom's accomplice or someone who tells the truth. Because..." Her voice cracked. "Because you're my sister and I should have protected you instead of protecting her." I didn't know what to feel. Gratitude that she was finally doing the right thing. Suspicion that this was somehow calculated. Anger that it had taken her this long. All of those emotions churned inside me, making it impossible to respond. "We should go in," Martin said. "Judge Chen is ready to start." Inside the courtroom, I saw that Claire's lawyer was someone I didn't recognize, not the young associate who'd sat beside her during her deposition, but a different attorney entirely. She'd changed representation. She'd separated herself from my parents' legal defense. The hearing began with arguments about the therapy records subpoena. Martin was brilliant, citing case law and medical privacy statutes, arguing that Patricia's motion was nothing more than a desperate attempt to smear me when the evidence against her was overwhelming. Dr. Chen had also filed a motion to quash, and her lawyer spoke passionately about the chilling effect it would have on mental health treatment if patients couldn't trust that their therapy sessions would remain private. Judge Chen listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and then announced she would rule on the therapy records issue later in the hearing. First, she wanted to hear testimony from Claire Montgomery. Claire took the stand, raised her right hand, and swore to tell the truth. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. But her voice when she spoke was clear. Martin began with simple questions. "Mrs. Montgomery, what is your relationship to the plaintiff?" "She's my older sister." "And what is your relationship to the defendant, Patricia Jenkins?" "She's my mother." "When did you first learn about your grandmother, Catherine Jenkins' will?" Claire took a deep breath. "Last month, December 20th. I overheard my mother on the phone with a lawyer. She was talking about a will dated 2013 and making sure someone named Amanda didn't find out about it." "What did you do after overhearing that conversation?" "I Googled Catherine Jenkins' will 2013. I found probate court records showing that my grandmother had left 40% of Jenkins' holdings to my sister Amanda. That's when I realized..." Her voice broke slightly. "That's when I realized the shares my mother had given me 3 years ago weren't actually hers to give." Martin walked her through the timeline. The shares transferred to her in 2021. the conversations she'd overheard over the years that hadn't made sense at the time, but now seemed clearly related to hiding the inheritance. The moment at Christmas Eve dinner when she'd realized the full scope of what her mother had done. "Mrs. Montgomery, did your mother ever explicitly tell you that she'd forged your sister's signature on a legal document?" "No, but Claire looked at our mother, who was sitting rigidly at the defense table, her face a mask of controlled fury. "I knew something was wrong. I knew, and I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answer." Patricia's lawyer, Gerald Haverford, approached for cross-examination with the predatory confidence of someone who thought he'd found a weak point. "Mrs. Montgomery, isn't it true that your marriage is currently in trouble?" "Yes." "Isn't it true that your husband's family, the Montgomerys, have expressed significant concern about your family's legal troubles?" "Yes." "So isn't this testimony really just an attempt to salvage your relationship with your husband's family? You're throwing your mother under the bus to save your marriage, aren't you?" I watched Claire's face, waiting for her to crumble under the accusation. But something in her expression hardened. "My marriage is struggling," she said quietly, "because I was complicit in fraud. Because I accepted stolen property and didn't ask where it came from. Because I chose my own comfort over my sister's rights. I'm testifying today because it's the right thing to do. I should have done it 12 years ago. I didn't. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. But I can start making it right today." The answer clearly wasn't what Haverford expected. He tried a few more questions, attempting to paint Claire as vindictive or opportunistic, but she held firm. She admitted her failings without making excuses. She acknowledged that her testimony was self-serving, but insisted it was also true. When she stepped down from the witness stand, she walked past our mother without looking at her. Patricia reached out, grabbed Claire's arm, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "How could you do this to me?" Patricia hissed, her voice carrying across the quiet courtroom. "After everything I've done for you, after everything I've sacrificed." Claire stopped, turned, and for the first time in my memory looked at our mother without fear or the desperate need for approval. "You mean after everything you've done to me?" Claire's voice was low but steady. "Making me part of your fraud without my knowledge. Using me to hide what you'd stolen from Amanda. Using my marriage, my life as a shield for your crimes. I'm done, Mom. I'm done being your accomplice. I'm done letting you control me with guilt and manipulation." She pulled her arm free and walked away. I watched our mother's face as Claire left the courtroom, watched the realization dawn that she'd lost both daughters, now that her need for control had finally cost her everything. Judge Chen called for a 10-minute recess. I stood to stretch to process what had just happened when Judge Chen's clerk approached Martin with a message. Martin read it, his eyebrows rising. He looked at me, then at the clerk, then back at the note. "What is it?" I asked. "The court just received a package. It was delivered this morning, addressed to Judge Chen, marked, 'Evidence in Jenkins versus Jenkins.' It's from—" He stopped checking the note again. "It's from a storage facility in Oakland. Apparently there was a safety deposit box registered to Catherine Jenkins that's been sitting in their facility since 2013. They're closing the facility and clearing out abandoned boxes, and someone found this one with a note saying it should be delivered to the courts if there was ever litigation regarding her estate." My heart started racing. "What's in it?" "Judge Chen is reviewing it now. She's called a recess to determine if it's admissible and relevant." Martin looked at me seriously. "Amanda, I don't know what's in that box, but your grandmother was a very careful woman. If she left something in a safety deposit box with instructions to deliver it in case of litigation—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. Whatever grandmother Catherine had left behind was about to change everything. The recess stretched from 10 minutes to 20, then 30. Martin kept checking his phone, stepping out to make calls, coming back with an expression I couldn't read. Judge Chen remained in her chambers. Patricia and her lawyer sat at their table in tense silence. Claire had left the courtroom entirely, probably to call David. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to remain calm, trying not to let hope or fear overwhelm me. Whatever was in that safety deposit box could change everything. Or it could be nothing. I wouldn't let myself assume either way. Finally, 45 minutes after the recess began, the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. Everyone took their seats. Judge Chen entered carrying a manila folder and what looked like a laptop. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Chen began, her voice formal, "during this recess, my chambers received a package from Secure Vault Storage in Oakland. The facility is closing permanently and has been clearing out abandoned safety deposit boxes. They discovered one registered to Catherine Margaret Jenkins, rented in March 2013, with instructions that if the box was ever accessed after her death, its contents should be delivered to any court of law handling disputes regarding her estate." My heart started pounding. Grandmother had planned for this. Even 12 years ago, she'd anticipated that her will might be challenged, that Patricia might try to hide it. Inside the box was a USB drive. Judge Chen continued, labeled, "For Amanda, Video Will, March 10, 2013. I've reviewed the contents. The video is clearly authentic, time-stamped, and directly relevant to the matters before this court. I'm going to play it now." She turned the laptop so the screen faced the courtroom. Martin had already seen it in chambers, I realized, which explained his expression. He reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, a gesture of support, or maybe warning. The video began, and there was my grandmother, Catherine Jenkins, sitting in what looked like a law office, though not Martin's. She was thinner than I remembered, her face gaunt from the illness that would take her life 3 months after this recording. But her eyes were clear, sharp, completely lucid. She was wearing a navy suit, pearls at her throat, her silver hair perfectly styled. Even dying, she maintained her standards. "My name is Catherine Margaret Jenkins." She began, her voice steady and strong. "Today is March 10th, 2013. I am 78 years old. I am making this video to accompany my written will, which I signed 5 days ago, to prevent any challenge to my mental competency or any suggestion that I was coerced or confused when I made my testamentary decisions." The camera pulled back slightly, showing a lawyer sitting beside her, a man I didn't recognize. He held up a document showing the date clearly. "I am of sound mind," Catherine continued. "I understand the nature and extent of my property. I understand who my natural heirs are, my son Robert, his wife Patricia, and my 2 granddaughters Amanda and Claire. I am making a deliberate, informed choice to leave 40% of my holdings, currently valued at approximately $8 million, to my granddaughter Amanda Catherine Jenkins." I felt tears starting to form, but blinked them back. I needed to hear every word of this. "I'm making this choice for several reasons," Catherine said. "First, Amanda has demonstrated the character, intelligence, and strength necessary to manage significant assets responsibly. She is independent, thoughtful, and unlikely to allow money to corrupt her values. Second, I believe she will use these resources to build something meaningful, not simply to maintain status or control others." She paused, took a visible breath, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, sadder. "But I'm also making this choice because I know my daughter-in-law Patricia will try to prevent Amanda from receiving this inheritance. Patricia believes I have been cruel to her, and she's right, I have been. For 15 years, I made her feel unwelcome in what should have been her home. I criticized her background, her education, her manners. I treated her as if she were contaminating the Jenkins family by being part of it. I was wrong to do that. It was cruel, and I regret it deeply." I glanced at my mother. She was staring at the screen, her face, pale tears streaming down her cheeks. "But," Catherine continued on the video, "perpetuating that cruelty by punishing Amanda would solve nothing. Patricia's pain is real, but using my estate as a weapon in her ongoing war with me would only damage another generation. Amanda is not responsible for my failings. She shouldn't be punished because she reminds Patricia of me." The courtroom was absolutely silent except for Catherine's voice. "If anyone is watching this video, it means my will is being challenged or hidden. Let me be absolutely clear, this is my wish. No one coerced me. No one manipulated me. No one pressured me into this decision. I am making this choice freely, with full understanding of its implications. Amanda Catherine Jenkins is to receive 40% of my estate. If anyone has attempted to prevent this, she looked directly into the camera as if she could see into the future, could see this exact moment. They are acting against my express wishes and should be held accountable under the law. The video ended. The screen went black. No one moved. No one spoke. I could hear someone crying softly. Claire, I thought, though I couldn't see her from where I sat. My own tears were flowing freely now, and I didn't try to stop them. Judge Chen closed the laptop and looked at Patricia's lawyer. Mr. Haverford, do you have any response to this evidence? Gerald Haverford stood slowly. For the first time since I'd seen him in court, he looked defeated. No, Your Honor. We have no response. Because what response could there be? How do you argue against a video of the testator clearly, explicitly stating her wishes? How do you claim someone was incompetent when they're recorded, speaking with perfect clarity about their reasoning? Judge Chen nodded. Then I'm going to rule from the bench. The evidence before this court is overwhelming. Mrs. Catherine Jenkins was demonstrably of sound mind when she executed her will. The will is valid and enforceable. The disclaimer of inheritance filed in 2014 contains a forged signature. Patricia Jenkins, you are hereby ordered to return all assets derived from the disputed 40% stake in Jenkins Holdings, plus 12 years of dividends and appreciation, to Ms. Amanda Jenkins within 90 days. Additionally, you are ordered to pay Ms. Jenkins's reasonable attorney fees and costs associated with this litigation. I felt Martin's hand on my shoulder steadying me as the full weight of those words sank in. I'd won. After 12 years, after months of fighting, after exposing every painful family secret, I'd won. But Judge Chen wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, her voice taking on a harder edge, I am referring this case to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution. The forgery of legal documents, the filing of fraudulent disclaimers with this court, and the conversion of assets through fraudulent means are serious crimes that warrant investigation by law enforcement. My mother made a sound, a gasp, or a sob, I couldn't tell. She stood abruptly and left the courtroom, her lawyer hurrying after her, and I sat there watching my grandmother's frozen image on the laptop screen, understanding finally that she'd given me more than money. She'd given me vindication. She'd given me proof that I'd been loved. She'd given me justice. 2 months after Judge Chen's ruling in the civil case, I received a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted to meet with me to discuss the criminal investigation. I sat across from Assistant District Attorney Lisa Moreno in her office at the Hall of Justice. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of Eleanor Montgomery. Ms. Jenkins, she began, we've reviewed all the evidence from your civil case. The forged signature, the fraudulent disclaimer filed with the court, the systematic concealment of your inheritance. Based on this evidence, we're filing criminal charges against your mother. She slid a document across the desk. 1 count of forgery under California Penal Code Section 470. 1 count of grand theft under Penal Code Section 487. Combined, if she's convicted on both counts, she's looking at a maximum sentence of 5 years in state prison. I stared at the document at my mother's name printed in black and white, under the heading, The People of the State of California versus Patricia Ann Jenkins. How do you feel about that? Lisa asked, watching me carefully. I don't know, I admitted. I wanted accountability. I wanted her to face consequences. But 5 years in prison, I couldn't finish the sentence. It's unlikely she'd get the maximum, Lisa said. But she'd almost certainly serve time. The evidence is overwhelming. The forged signature is documented. The video will prove her intent to conceal. Her own daughter testified against her. A jury would convict. 3 weeks later, Martin called me with news that my mother had retained a criminal defense attorney, a different lawyer than Gerald Haverford, someone who specialized in white-collar crime. The attorney had requested a meeting with the DA's office to discuss a possible plea agreement. Another month passed. I tried to focus on work on rebuilding my life, but the criminal case hung over everything. I knew my mother was facing a choice: take a plea deal, or go to trial and risk years in prison. Then Martin called again. The DA's office made an offer. Your mother's lawyer came to me asking if you'd consider supporting a reduced sentence in exchange for a guilty plea. What are they offering? She pleads guilty to 1 count of forgery. The grand theft charge gets dropped. DA recommends 18 months in county jail. She'd be eligible for release after 12 months with good behavior, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. She'd have to make full restitution, which she's already been ordered to do in the civil case, and she'd have a permanent felony conviction on her record. 18 months. 12 months with good behavior. Not 5 years, but still my mother in jail. What do you think? I asked. I think it's a fair offer, Martin said carefully. She committed serious crimes. She stole millions of dollars. She defrauded the courts. 12 months is lenient, honestly. But Amanda, this is your call. If you tell the DA you want them to push for the maximum, they'll take your opinion into account. I thought about it for 3 days. Thought about my mother's tears at the restaurant, her confession about Grandmother Catherine's cruelty, the generational pain that had poisoned everything. Thought about whether punishment would actually change anything, or if it would just add more suffering to an already tragic situation. Finally, I asked Martin to write a letter to the DA on my behalf. I dictated it carefully. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. If Mrs. Jenkins pleads guilty and admits what she did, I won't push for maximum sentencing. But she needs to face real consequences. What she did wasn't just morally wrong, it was criminal. She forged legal documents, defrauded the courts, and stole my inheritance. If she doesn't face consequences for those actions, she'll never truly change, and this cycle of hurt will continue. I support the plea agreement as offered, contingent on a genuine admission of guilt. Patricia took the plea deal. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for late April, nearly 5 months after that Christmas Eve dinner that had started everything. I sat in the courtroom with Martin on one side and, surprisingly, Eleanor Montgomery on the other. She'd driven in from her home in Mill Valley to attend. I want to see this through, Eleanor had said when I'd called to let her know about the hearing. I testified in the civil case. I should be here for the conclusion. My mother entered the courtroom in a simple gray dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked years older than she had at Christmas. The confident, controlling woman who'd orchestrated family gatherings and social appearances had been replaced by someone diminished, frightened. Judge Chen, the same judge from the civil case, entered. Patricia's criminal defense lawyer stood and confirmed that his client was pleading guilty to 1 count of forgery. Mrs. Jenkins, Judge Chen said, do you understand that by pleading guilty to this charge you are admitting that you forged your daughter's signature on a legal document with the intent to deprive her of her rightful inheritance? Yes, Your Honor. My mother's voice was barely audible. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the court before I impose sentence? Patricia's lawyer had prepared a statement. I could see the papers in his hand, but my mother shook her head and set them aside. She stood gripping the edge of the defendant's table as if she needed it to hold herself upright. I let my pain turn me into someone cruel, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I was hurt by my mother-in-law for 15 years, and instead of healing from that hurt, I passed it on to my daughter. I looked at Amanda and saw the woman who'd made me feel worthless, and I punished Amanda for that. I stole from her. I erased her from family history. I forged her signature on legal documents because I couldn't stand the idea that my mother-in-law had valued her more than she'd valued me. She paused, took a shaky breath. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I hurt my daughter because I was hurting, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry for the 37 years of pain I caused. I'm sorry. Judge Chen looked at my mother for a long moment. Then she spoke. Mrs. Jenkins, I'm sentencing you to 18 months in San Mateo County Jail with eligibility for release after 12 months contingent on good behavior. You will then serve 3 years of supervised probation. You will complete the restitution ordered in the civil judgment, and you will carry a felony conviction for the rest of your life." She paused, then turned to me. "Ms. Jenkins, I want to say something to you directly. You've shown remarkable grace throughout this process. You could have pushed for maximum sentencing. You could have sought vengeance instead of justice. You didn't. I hope you use your inheritance to build something better than what was broken." I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. My mother was led away by the bailiff. She looked back once, not at me, but at my father, who sat alone in the back row. He raised one hand in a small, sad gesture of goodbye, and I sat there feeling not triumph, but something more complicated. Justice, yes, but also grief. Because winning shouldn't have been necessary. None of this should have been necessary. 15 months after that Christmas Eve dinner that detonated my family, I stood in the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel wearing a floor-length navy gown, accepting an award I'd never imagined receiving. The San Francisco Business Leaders Gala was the kind of event I usually avoided: too much networking, too much small talk, too much performance. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was being honored as CEO of the Year. I'd been promoted to CEO of Vanguard Capital 6 months earlier, after closing a deal that had taken 2 years to structure. The promotion had nothing to do with the lawsuit. My work spoke for itself, but the timing felt significant, as if the universe was confirming that I'd been worthy all along, that my mother's assessment of me as an embarrassment had been wrong in every possible way. Standing on stage in front of 500 business leaders holding a crystal award, with my name engraved on it, I felt surreal. A year and a half ago, I was the daughter told not to come to Christmas because my presence would shame the family. Now I was being publicly recognized for excellence in my field. I looked out at the audience and saw Eleanor Montgomery in the 3rd row smiling at me with genuine pride. Beside her was Harrison, who'd sent me a congratulatory email the day my promotion was announced. A few rows back, I spotted Claire sitting with David. She caught my eye and gave me a small, tentative smile. Their marriage had survived, though I knew from our occasional phone calls that it had required extensive therapy and a fundamental rebuilding of trust. My mother was absent, of course. She'd been released from county jail 2 months ago after serving 12 months, but she was still on probation. She wouldn't be attending society events for a long time, possibly ever again. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the microphone with the speech I'd carefully prepared. I didn't mention the lawsuit directly, that wasn't appropriate for tonight, but everyone in this room knew. The case had been too public, too dramatic to fade into obscurity. Last year, I began, my voice steady. I learned an important lesson about visibility and worth. The room went quiet. People leaned forward, slightly interested. For most of my life, I believed that being low profile was the same as being humble. I didn't promote my work. I didn't talk about my achievements. I kept my head down and let my results speak for themselves. I told myself this was modesty, that it was the right way to conduct myself professionally. I paused, looked out at the audience. But it wasn't modesty. It was fear. Fear that if I stood out, I'd be cut down. Fear that claiming success would invite criticism. Fear that I wasn't actually worthy of recognition, and if I drew attention to myself, everyone would realize I was an imposter. I saw several women in the audience nodding. They understood. This award isn't just recognition of professional achievement, though I'm deeply honored by that. It's a reminder to me, and hopefully to others, that women don't have to shrink themselves to be loved or valued. We don't have to minimize our accomplishments to make others comfortable. We can be successful and worthy of belonging. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. The applause that followed was warm, sustained. I returned to my seat feeling like I'd said something true, something that mattered. But the evening's most significant moment came after the formal program ended. I stepped up to the microphone one more time and made an announcement I'd been planning for months. "I'd like to take this opportunity to announce the creation of the Katherine Jenkins Foundation," I said. "The foundation will provide financial support and mentorship to women who have been excluded from family businesses or inheritance due to gender bias, family conflict, or systematic marginalization." I'd worked with lawyers and accountants to structure it properly. The initial funding was $2 million from my inheritance money that felt both heavy and meaningful, tainted by how I'd had to fight for it, but powerful in what it could accomplish. My grandmother made mistakes. I continued aware that I was speaking about Katherine Jenkins in front of people who'd known her. She could be cruel. She perpetuated cycles of pain that damaged my family across generations. But she also understood something important: financial independence is freedom. This foundation will help women who've been told they're not worthy of their family's legacy to build legacies of their own. The announcement was covered by the Chronicle the next morning. Several business publications picked it up. My inbox filled with messages from women sharing their own stories of being excluded, erased, written out of family histories. Katherine's complicated legacy was being transformed into something redemptive, something that might actually help people. At the after-party, I stepped outside onto the terrace for air. The April evening was cool fog beginning to roll in from the bay. I stood at the railing, letting the noise and energy of the party fade behind me. "Amanda?" I turned to see Claire standing in the doorway, hesitant. "Can I join you?" she asked. "Of course." We stood together in silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Claire had testified against our mother, returned the stolen shares, cooperated fully with the investigation. Her marriage had survived, but barely. Eleanor Montgomery had slowly, cautiously welcomed her back into the family, though the relationship would never be what it was. "I'm proud of you," Claire said quietly. "The award, the foundation, everything you've built." "Thank you," I said. "And thank you for testifying. I know what it cost you." Claire laughed, but it was bitter. "It cost me Mom's love. Though I'm starting to realize I never really had that anyway. I had her approval, which is very different. Her approval was conditional on me being exactly what she needed me to be. Love shouldn't work that way." We weren't close. We might never be close. Too much had happened, too much trust had been broken. But there was a tentative peace between us now, an understanding that we were both survivors of the same broken family system. "We can't change our family," I said. "We can't rewrite our childhoods or undo the damage. But maybe we can choose who we become anyway." Claire nodded. "I hope so. I really hope so." The next morning, my assistant buzzed me at work. "There's a courier here with a letter for you. Hand delivery marked personal." The envelope was plain white, my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Patricia's handwriting, shakier than it used to be, but unmistakable. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it, knowing that whatever was inside would complicate the fragile peace I'd been building. I sat at my desk with the envelope in my hands for several minutes before opening it. My assistant had left, closing the door behind her to give me privacy. Outside my window, the financial district hummed with its usual energy, but inside my office, time seemed suspended. Finally, I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out several sheets of plain paper, the kind you'd buy at any drugstore. My mother's handwriting was shakier than I remembered the elegant cursive I'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists, now uncertain, the letters slanting at odd angles. "Dear Amanda," it began. "I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I'm writing because my therapist, yes, I finally have one, says I need to take responsibility without demanding anything in return, that I need to acknowledge what I did without expecting absolution. So here it is, as plainly as I can say it, I was wrong." I set the letter down for a moment, took a breath, then picked it up again. Not just legally wrong, though I was that too. Morally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. I blamed you for looking like Katherine. I blamed you for being loved by her. I blamed you for reminding me of my own inadequacy, my own wounds, my own failure to be what she wanted me to be. I let 37 years of pain turn me into exactly what I hated. I became her. The woman who made people feel small. The woman who excluded and criticized and withheld love as punishment. You deserved a mother who celebrated you. Instead, you got me. My vision blurred slightly. I blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall yet. I needed to read the whole thing before I let myself feel anything. I'm learning about generational trauma here. The letter continued. About how hurt people, how cycles of pain repeat and amplify until someone has the courage to break them. You broke it, Amanda, not me. I just kept feeding the cycle, kept passing down the poison Catherine gave me like it was a family heirloom. I see that now, though it took losing everything to see it. The handwriting got messier here, as if she'd been crying while writing. I also see what I stole from you. Not just the money, though, that was theft. I stole belonging. I stole the chance to grieve your grandmother with family around you. I stole the knowledge that someone saw your worth and wanted to protect it. I stole Christmases and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays. I stole 37 years of having a mother who loved you unconditionally. I can't give any of that back. Time doesn't work that way. All I can do is say I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The letter ended there. No signature, just those repeated apologies trailing off as if she'd run out of words. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down and stared at my desk, trying to identify what I was feeling. It wasn't the clean satisfaction of vindication. It wasn't triumph. It was something more complicated, a tangled mess of emotions I couldn't easily name. Anger, yes. Because an apology doesn't undo decades of harm. But also something softer. Not forgiveness, I wasn't there yet and might never be. But maybe understanding recognition that my mother was both villain and victim in this story. That pain can explain behavior without excusing it. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the therapist I'd started seeing 6 months ago when the weight of the lawsuit and its aftermath had become too much to carry alone. "Amanda," she answered warmly. "How are you? I got a letter from my mother." "Ah, do you want to come in or would you like to talk now?" "Now if you have time." "I have 20 minutes before my next appointment. Talk to me." I read her the letter. When I finished, there was a long pause. "What do you want to do with this?" Dr. Martinez asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to acknowledge it. It feels important that she's taking responsibility, that she's doing therapy, that she's not making excuses. But I struggled to articulate it. I don't want to let her back into my life. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Does that make me cruel?" "Amanda," Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but firm. "That's called a boundary. And boundaries aren't cruel, they're necessary for survival. You can acknowledge someone's remorse while still protecting yourself from further harm. Those aren't mutually exclusive." "But she's my mother." "Yes. And she's also someone who systematically erased you from your own family for 37 years. Someone who stole millions of dollars from you. Someone who forged legal documents. The fact that she's now expressing remorse is a step toward her own healing. But it doesn't obligate you to anything. You get to decide what relationship, if any, you want with her going forward." I closed my eyes, let those words sink in. I want to respond. I don't want to ignore the letter. But I need her to understand that an apology doesn't automatically mean reconciliation. That sounds very healthy. That evening I sat down at my kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper and a pen. It took me an hour to write 3 paragraphs. "Mom, I received your letter. I appreciate your honesty and I'm glad you're working with a therapist. That's important work and I hope you continue it. I hope you find peace with your past and build a better future." I paused, considered crossing that out, but left it. It was true, even if the sentiment felt complicated. But I need to be clear, I'm not ready for a relationship. Maybe someday I will be, maybe not. Right now, I need space to heal from 37 years of hurt. I need time to build a life that isn't defined by family pain. That doesn't mean I hate you. It means I love myself enough to choose my own well-being. I signed it simply, Amanda. I mailed it the next morning before I could second-guess myself. 6 months passed. I threw myself into work, into the foundation, into building something meaningful from the wreckage of family trauma. The Katherine Jenkins Foundation funded its first 3 recipients, women who'd been excluded from family businesses, who'd been written out of wills, who'd been told they weren't worthy of their families' legacies. Watching them receive funding and mentorship felt like a small redemption for everything that had happened. Then, in early November, I received another letter. The envelope was the same plain white, my mother's shaky handwriting, but this one was shorter. Dear Amanda, I'm not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted you to know that your father and I would like to invite you to Christmas dinner this year if you're willing. No pressure, no expectations, just dinner. Claire and David will be there. It would mean a great deal to us, but I understand if you're not ready. With love, Mom. I stared at that closing. With love. She'd never signed a letter to me that way before. I called Claire. Did you know about this? The Christmas invitation? Yes, Dad asked me what I thought. I told him it was up to you. What do you think I should do? Claire was quiet for a moment. I think you should do whatever feels right for you. Not for them. Not for me. For you. I held the invitation for a week before deciding. I called Dr. Martinez first. She invited me to Christmas dinner. How do you feel about that? Conflicted, confused. Part of me wants to say no immediately, but another part thinks maybe I should give them a chance I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Let me ask you something if you say yes. Who are you doing it for? That stopped me. What do you mean? Are you going because you genuinely want to see if a relationship with your parents is possible? Or are you going because you feel obligated, because they're family, and you think you're supposed to give them another chance? I thought about that for a long time. I don't know. Then I think you need to figure that out before you make a decision, because if you go out of obligation, you'll resent it. And if you go because you genuinely want to explore whether some form of relationship is possible, you need to be clear with yourself about what that means. I called Maria next. They invited me to Christmas. Oh, wow, that's big. Eleanor Montgomery won't even speak to my mother. Eleanor, who's one of the most forgiving people I know professionally, has completely cut ties with my family. Maybe I should do the same. Maria made a thoughtful sound. Or maybe Eleanor's boundaries are different from yours. She witnessed what happened, but she didn't live through 37 years of it. Only you can decide what's right for you. But what if I go and it's awful? What if my mother says something or does something and I end up more hurt than before? Then you leave, Maria said simply. You're an adult. You're not the child who had to accept whatever treatment your mother gave you. You have power now. You can set terms. You can leave anytime you want. Finally, I called Eleanor because her opinion mattered to me in ways I was still figuring out. They invited me to Christmas, I told her. I heard. Robert called to let me know, I think hoping I'd reconsider my own position. I declined. Eleanor's voice was firm. I cannot and will not associate with someone who committed fraud. That's my boundary. Do you think I shouldn't go? I think you should do whatever feels right for you, Amanda. Not for them, not for your father's feelings or your mother's rehabilitation. For you. What do you want? I sat with that question for 3 days. What did I want? I didn't want a close relationship with Patricia. That was clear. The betrayal had been too deep, too systematic, too deliberate. I couldn't imagine sitting across from her at regular family dinners, calling her for advice, sharing my life with her the way daughters are supposed to share their lives with mothers. But I also didn't want to carry the weight of total estrangement for the rest of my life. Didn't want to be the person who refused to even try, who couldn't forgive enough to exist in the same room. Maybe that made me weak, or maybe it made me something else, someone who could hold both truths. My mother had damaged me profoundly, and she was also a damaged person who might be trying to change. On the third day, I called my father's cell phone. "Amanda." His voice was thick with hope and fear. "I'll come to Christmas dinner," I said. "But I have conditions." "Of course. Anything." 2 hours only. 6 to 8 p.m. Ground rules: we don't discuss the lawsuit. We don't revisit the past. No apologies or emotional reconciliation attempts. We have dinner, we make small talk, and I leave. I'm not promising this leads to regular contact. I'm not promising future holidays. This is a trial run to see if we can exist in the same room without damaging each other. There was a long pause. "I understand. If Mom can't handle those boundaries, if she tries to have some big emotional moment or pushes for more than I'm offering, I will leave immediately, and I won't come back. I'll make sure she understands." Robert's voice cracked slightly. "Thank you, Amanda. Thank you for giving us this chance." After I hung up, I sat with my phone in my hand, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Christmas Eve arrived. I spent the day working the Katherine Jenkins Foundation, had applications to review, and focusing on other women's struggles helped me avoid thinking about my own. At 5:30, I changed into a simple cashmere sweater and jeans. Nothing fancy. This wasn't a performance. I drove to Pacific Heights, to the house where I'd grown up. I parked across the street and sat in my car for 5 minutes, breathing deeply, reminding myself that I could leave at any moment. I wasn't trapped. I was choosing this. The house looked different somehow. Smaller. The garden wasn't quite as immaculate as it used to be. Some of the hedge needed trimming. A small crack ran through one of the front steps. The house was aging, or maybe my parents simply didn't have the energy to maintain Patricia's former standards of perfection. I rang the doorbell at exactly 6 o'clock. Robert answered. He looked older, much older than I'd expected. His hair had gone completely gray. He'd lost weight. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears, but he didn't try to hug me. He'd learned boundaries at least a little. "Amanda, thank you for coming." Behind him, I could see Patricia standing in the hallway. She was wearing a simple dress, no jewelry except her wedding ring. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, styled plainly. She looked older too, and smaller somehow. The woman who'd commanded every room she entered had been replaced by someone tentative, uncertain. Our eyes met. I saw fear in her face and something that might have been hope. Neither of us moved. No embrace. No tears. Just a moment of recognition, two people who'd hurt each other profoundly, standing in the same space for the first time in nearly 2 years. "Hi, Dad," I said. Then, forcing the words out, "Hi, Mom." Just 2 words. But as I stepped inside the house, past the familiar smell of my mother's candles and the photographs on the walls that still didn't include me, I realized something. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation or rebuilding a family that had never really existed. This was about proving to myself that I could face my past without being destroyed by it, that I was strong enough to exist in proximity to pain without letting it control me. And as I followed my father into the dining room, smaller than I remembered, the table set for just 4, instead of the elaborate dinner parties Patricia used to host, I understood something about justice that I hadn't understood before. Dinner was awkward in the way that gatherings are when everyone is trying very hard to be normal. Robert asked safe questions about my work, carefully avoiding anything too personal. Claire, who was visibly pregnant, now talked about nursery colors and baby names. David contributed stories about his latest business trip. The conversation felt rehearsed, overly careful, but it was civil. What struck me most was Patricia's silence. My mother, who had always dominated every conversation, who had orchestrated every social interaction, like a conductor leading an orchestra, was quiet. She responded when spoken to, passed dishes when asked, but she didn't try to control the room. It was unsettling seeing her so diminished. Part of me had expected the old Patricia to emerge, the one who couldn't help but offer unsolicited advice or steer conversations toward topics she found acceptable. But she didn't. She just sat there, smaller, somehow present, but not commanding. About an hour in, Patricia excused herself to clear plates. I watched her carry dishes to the kitchen, her movements careful and deliberate, and something made me stand and follow. Not out of longing for connection, but out of curiosity. Or maybe something I didn't have a name for yet. In the kitchen, she was loading the dishwasher, rinsing each plate before placing it in the rack. Her hands shook slightly. "Can I help?" I asked. She looked up, surprised. "You don't have to." "I know, but I offered." We worked in silence for a few minutes, falling into an easy rhythm. She rinsed, I dried, and put away. It felt strange, this domestic normalcy with the woman who'd spent years erasing me. Then Patricia spoke, her voice quiet. "I'm not going to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know something. Prison wasn't the punishment. The punishment is knowing what I destroyed. Knowing that I had a daughter who was brilliant and strong and kind, and I treated her like an enemy because I couldn't handle my own pain. The punishment is watching you succeed and knowing I had nothing to do with it." I set down the dish I was drying. "You're right. I did thrive without you, and that is sad for both of us. You missed watching me grow up, and I missed having a mother who celebrated me." She nodded, not looking at me. "But I'm starting to understand that justice isn't really about punishment." I continued, surprising myself with the words as I spoke them. "It's about stopping the harm. You can't hurt me anymore because I won't let you. That's the boundary. And as long as that boundary holds, maybe we can exist in each other's lives in some small way. Not as mother and daughter exactly, but as people who share history." At 8 o'clock, exactly as I'd promised, I said my goodbyes. I hugged Claire, who whispered, "Thank you for coming," in my ear. I shook Robert's hand. And then I stood in front of Patricia. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then I said, "Merry Christmas, Mom." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was acknowledgement. Recognition. A door not slammed shut but not fully open either, just slightly ajar, with the understanding that it might stay that way forever. And that was okay. As I drove home through San Francisco's fog-wrapped streets, I thought about Grandmother Catherine's letter. "Break the cycle," she'd written. And I realized I had. Not by winning the lawsuit, though that mattered. Not by getting the inheritance, though that helped. But by choosing to be different. By refusing to let pain make me cruel. By setting boundaries that protected me while leaving space for others to heal. 6 months later, a small package arrived at my office. Inside was a photograph, Claire holding a tiny newborn wrapped in pink. The birth announcement read, "Catherine Amanda Montgomery." I cried, but this time they were tears of hope. So what did Amanda's story teach us? That justice isn't about making others suffer. It's about refusing to let their pain become yours. That breaking generational cycles doesn't require perfection, just the courage to choose differently. Amanda learned that boundaries aren't cruelty, they're self-love. That forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or returning to what was broken. And most importantly, that the greatest inheritance isn't money or property, it's the freedom to become who you were meant to be, not who others tried to make you. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? How did you break cycles of pain in your own life? Your story might help someone else find their courage. Remember, you don't need anyone's permission to choose your own well-being. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve. Thanks for watching.